Imagine this. You open your eyes in a marble palace overlooking the blue shimmer of the Mediterranean. The air smells of myrrh and sea salt. Silk curtains sway like whispers, and somewhere below, the heart of Alexandria beats, bright and restless. You think you've awoken in paradise, but no. You've arrived in a world trembling on the edge of its own myth, an empire's twilight caught in the hands of one woman. Her name, Cleopatra. Even before you see her, you feel her presence moving through this place. Every marble column, every breath of incense seems tuned to her will. A name that will not drown in time, even as kingdoms crumble around it. Cleopatra Philopator, she who loves her father, the last pharaoh, the last breath of Egypt's ancient soul. Listen closely. You can almost hear the city hum below. Alexandria, jewel of the Nile, crown of Egypt. Founded by Alexander the Great 3 centuries ago, built as a vision of harmony between Greek order and Egyptian spirit. A place of scrolls and philosophers, mathematicians and merchants, priests and sailors. A place that dreamed it could bridge worlds. And at the center of it, a queen born to rule a dynasty already cracking under its own gold. The Ptolemies, her bloodline, had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years. Greek by birth, Macedonian in pride, Egyptian by necessity. They spoke the tongue of Plato, worshipped in temples to Isis, and crowned themselves with pharaonic serpents while plotting like Hellenistic kings. Incest, murder, betrayal, these were not scandals in her family. They were family traditions. But Cleopatra, she would be something else entirely. She would not fade into history as another silk-clad shadow whispering in marble halls. She would make herself eternal. The palace stirs. Dawn filters through alabaster screens, painting the walls with gold. Servants move like smoke, bare feet silent on mosaic floors. The sea beyond the harbor flashes with the first light of morning, where Roman galleys gleam like metal beasts waiting for command. In the distance, the Pharos, the great lighthouse, rises from the island like a god's finger pointing toward heaven. Flames roar atop it, guiding ships from the far corners of the world, ivory from Kush, spices from India, scrolls from Athens, silk from Parthia. Alexandria, a crossroads of everything beautiful and dangerous. And somewhere in its labyrinth of marble and perfume, a young princess studies by lamplight. Cleopatra is not yet queen. Not yet legend. She is a girl of perhaps 12 or 13, her hair bound in tight braids, her eyes sharp as obsidian. She reads by the glow of oil lamps, Greek, Latin, Egyptian hieroglyphs, her fingers tracing symbols older than empires. Around her, tutors murmur in Greek, priests drone hymns to Are. She listens to all, absorbs all. Already she understands what her ancestors forgot, that Egypt is not merely a throne to be claimed, but a world to be understood. She is her father's daughter, yes. Ptolemy 12. Alits, they call him, the flute player. A man more musician than monarch, charming and weak. He loves spectacle, hates politics, and spends the treasury faster than priests can count it. Rome owns him, and he knows it. But his daughter, she watches him the way a hawk watches the horizon. She learns from his failures. She learns how easily a crown can become a chain. Imagine her walking the library of Alexandria, where the air smells of papyrus and cedar. Scrolls tower like walls. The world's knowledge, thousands of years of it, stacked in orderly rows. She runs her fingers along their spines, whispers their titles under her breath. Mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, medicine, law. Later, when Rome mocks her as a temptress, a seductress, a witch, remember this, she was first and foremost a scholar. A ruler who could debate philosophers in Greek, converse with priests in Egyptian, and negotiate with Romans in their own Latin. She was the only one of her dynasty to learn the language of her people, a symbolic act that mattered more than armies. When the priests of Isis chanted in the great temples, she could answer them in the language of the gods. Already, whispers begin? That the young princess is unlike her siblings, calmer, cleverer, dangerous in her patience. Her elder sister, Berenice, burns with jealousy. The younger brothers squabble like spoiled children. And the court, that glittering serpent pit, begins to coil around itself. In Alexandria, power is a performance. Every glance, every feast, every offering to the gods is a move in the game. Cleopatra learns to move among them with silence and precision. She learns when to smile, when to listen, when to vanish. But beneath that composure there is fire. She listens at the doors of council chambers where Greek nobles and Egyptian priests argue over taxes and tribute. She watches her father bend the knee to Roman envoys, his face pale with fear. She watches coins stamped not with the face of a pharaoh, but of Caesar, the foreigner, the conqueror. And she begins to dream of a different Egypt. Night in Alexandria is never truly dark. The sea glitters with torchlight, and the air hums with music from taverns by the harbor. In the royal palace, the moonlight paints silver across the colonnades. Cleopatra stands by a balcony, a child still, but with a woman's poise. Below her, the city breathes. The harbor creaks with ships from every nation. The smell of salt, wine, and fish mingles with incense. Somewhere in the distance, a scholar argues about the shape of the earth. A priest sacrifices a white bull to Isis. A prostitute laughs in an alleyway. A poet recites verses to a crowd. This is her kingdom, not yet hers by law, but already by will. She understands that Egypt is a performance that must never end. Its temples, its rituals, its gods, all must live as long as the Nile flows. The people must believe that their queen is divine, even as Rome's shadow lengthens over their land. And she swears, perhaps not aloud, but deep in her bones, that she will never bow to that shadow. Years pass. Her father, desperate to hold the throne, flees to Rome, leaving chaos behind. Her sister seizes power. Blood stains the marble. Rebellion brews in the streets. The girl becomes a fugitive in her own kingdom. But that is a tale for the next breath. For now, imagine her standing on the edge of the harbor, wind pulling her hair across her face, the sea foaming at her feet. Ships creak against their moorings. Somewhere across the water lies Rome, the wolf that devours empires. And here stands Cleopatra, last daughter of the Nile, staring into the wind as if daring it to try her. History does not know her yet. But it will. Because some names, like hers, do not fade. They echo. They shimmer through centuries like sunlight on the sea. Cleopatra. The wind off the harbor changes as dawn rises higher. The gulls turn circles above the sea walls, their cries sharp as the ring of bronze on stone. Below them, Alexandria glitters awake, gold and white, built from the bones of Greek ambition and the breath of Egyptian sun. You follow Cleopatra's gaze as she looks out toward the Pharos lighthouse, its fire still burning even under the daylight, a symbol of what her people once dreamed, that Egypt could rule the world again, if only guided by a steady hand. But before she was born, before her father's flute filled these marble corridors with its lonely song, another conqueror's name haunted this city. Alexander. The man who never lost a battle, who carved his empire out of mountains and myth. When he died, barely 33, his generals tore his legacy apart like wolves over a carcass. Among them was one who chose Egypt, a soldier named Ptolemy, son of Lagus. He had fought beside Alexander, shared his wine, and carried his body back across the sands when death claimed him in Babylon. That gesture alone gave him power, and perhaps, in his mind, permission. He took Egypt not as a conqueror but as an heir. And so began the dynasty that would rule this land for nearly 3 centuries, a dynasty built on brilliance, beauty, and betrayal. The Ptolemies. Their story is not one of peace. It is a lineage of knives wrapped in silk, of siblings made lovers and lovers made corpses. The Greeks who became pharaohs, wearing crowns of gold and serpents, performing rituals for gods they only half believed in. They built libraries instead of temples, theaters instead of shrines. They imported scholars from Athens, sculptors from Rhodes, actors from Syracuse. Egypt became their stage, and they played gods upon it. The first Ptolemy, clever and ruthless, called himself Soter, the savior. He filled Alexandria with marble and learning, gathered the writings of the known world, and built the great library where knowledge was worshipped as a kind of divinity. He wanted Greece to see Egypt not as a conquest but as an idea, a bridge between worlds. But blood has its own gravity, and the Ptolemies soon began to spiral inward. One generation after another, they married brother to sister, imitating the ancient pharaohs whose divine unions were meant to mirror the gods Isis and Osiris. It was a symbolic act, the purity of the royal line made flesh. But it was also madness. Paranoia thickened their palaces. Love became strategy. Children became rivals before they could walk. A Ptolemaic wedding was often a rehearsal for murder. Imagine the great palace at its height. Marble columns painted with bright blue lapis, peacocks crying in the courtyards, fountains perfumed with rosewater. Behind every curtain, whispers. Behind every smile, suspicion. The throne of Egypt was never inherited peacefully. It was seized, again and again, by cunning, charm, or bloodshed. And yet, somehow, through all the poison and poetry, the dynasty endured. By the time Cleopatra was born in 69 BC, her family had ruled for nearly 300 years, but their world had shrunk. The once mighty empire of the Nile was now a jewel under Roman shadow. The great powers of the Mediterranean, Greece, Carthage, Macedonia, had all bent the knee or burned. Rome stood alone, fat with conquest and hungry for more. Egypt was no longer the master of the seas, but it still possessed something Rome coveted: grain, gold, and glory. The breadbasket of the ancient world. Without Egypt, Rome's people starved. And so Egypt remained technically independent, a puppet whose strings ran straight to the Senate. Cleopatra was born into that tension, into a world pretending to still be free. Her father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, clung to power not by strength, but by bribes. When his throne wobbled, he sent tributes of gold to Roman senators, fattening their purses to buy their protection. He was called the flute player, because he played music while his kingdom unraveled. But the Egyptians, proud as the desert wind, never stopped remembering what their land had once been. They called their rulers pharaohs, divine, chosen by the gods. When they looked upon Cleopatra, perhaps some still believed they saw the same sacred fire that once blazed in the eyes of Nefertiti or Hatshepsut. Maybe they were right. The palace is alive again with motion, servants carrying baskets of figs and pomegranates, soldiers pacing the courtyards, the scent of incense curling through carved halls. Somewhere in the West Wing, the scholars of the Muse Zion are already arguing about the movements of the stars. But the young princess walks alone beneath painted ceilings. Her sandals whisper over mosaics that tell her family's story in stone: Alexander crowned by priests, Ptolemy holding the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, queens veiled in gold. Each one looking down as if daring her to match their legend. The air smells of wax and cedar. In the distance, her father's flute plays a wandering, melancholy tune. She pauses by a window where sunlight strikes a golden cobra coiled around a scepter, the symbol of divine rule. She touches it lightly, and for a moment you can see the thought flicker in her eyes, that perhaps her destiny will not be to inherit this decaying empire, but to revive it, to make the world remember Egypt again. Centuries before her, another Cleopatra had ruled, Cleopatra II, who fought her own brother in civil war, Cleopatra III, who married her uncle and then her son. Even the gods might have lost track of who belonged to whom in that family tree. But for all their chaos, each generation had one unshakable belief: the Ptolemaic bloodline was not merely royal. It was divine. Theirs was a kingdom where myth and politics blended until they were indistinguishable. The queen was not merely a woman, she was Isis reborn. The king was Osiris returned. Their union kept the universe in balance, or so the priests proclaimed. The sun would rise only if they ruled together in harmony. But harmony was a word rarely spoken in those halls. Now, imagine the city beyond the palace walls. Alexandria at its zenith, marble streets lined with sphinxes and obelisks stolen from older dynasties, markets echoing with the calls of traders in every tongue from Phoenician to Persian, the perfume of lotus and fish oil drifting from the docks, philosophers debating under shaded porticos while sailors haul amphorae of wine to the warehouses. It is both Greek and Egyptian, ancient and modern, a city that feels like it could outlast the world itself. Yet its rulers are fragile, their bloodline decaying from within. Cleopatra grows up watching this contradiction. Her family pretends to be gods, but they live like gamblers at the edge of ruin. She sees what her ancestors built and what they squandered. And in that contrast, she learns her first great lesson: to survive in Egypt is to adapt. It is to know when to speak in Greek to charm the scholars, when to speak in Egyptian to win the people, and when to speak in silence to watch your enemies destroy themselves. In the evenings, she sits with her tutors by candlelight, translating verses from Homer. She learns of Odysseus, the trickster king, whose cleverness saved him when strength could not. Perhaps she feels a kinship there, a kind of foretelling. Because soon she will need all the cunning of 1,000 Odysseus's just to keep her crown. But for now, she is still the child of Alexandria, daughter of the Nile and the Muse Ion, heir to a world glittering and cracked. She listens to her father's musicians play their soft melodies as the last light fades from the colonnades. The torches flare to life. Outside, the streets fill with laughter and gossip. Inside, the queen-to-be sits quietly, absorbing every word, every gesture, every silence. The dynasty of the Ptolemies surrounds her, 300 years of triumph and tragedy pressing on her shoulders. She knows their history as if it were scripture. She knows that every throne in her lineage was won not by inheritance, but by strategy. And she begins to shape herself accordingly. Her eyes, dark and watchful, already carry the calm calculation of a ruler who understands that power is not given, it is taken, with grace. The night deepens. The moon climbs over the harbor. The torches along the palace terraces flicker in the wind, their flames bending east toward the unseen horizon, toward Rome. Cleopatra stands at the window again, her reflection glimmering faintly in the polished bronze mirror beside her. For a moment, she looks older than her years. The music in the distance falters, the flute falling silent. Only the waves remain, crashing softly below. She thinks, perhaps, of her ancestor Ptolemy, who carved a kingdom out of Alexander's corpse. She thinks of the queens who fought their brothers for thrones, of the fathers who bribed empires to survive another season. And she realizes, with the clarity of prophecy, that she will inherit not just a crown, but a storm. The dynasty that made her will also be the one she must outlive. And in that knowledge, something inside her hardens, not cruelty, not yet, but resolve. Because empires may crumble, bloodlines may rot, but names can become eternal. The torchlight flickers once, as if in agreement. The sea whispers against the shore. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Rome sharpens its knives. And Cleopatra, daughter of the Ptolemies, student of history, heir to chaos, closes her eyes, hearing the faintest echo of destiny. That one day, the whole world will know her name. The moon drifts lower over Alexandria, its reflection trembling across the harbor's dark surface like liquid silver. Inside the royal palace, the night is a mosaic of candlelight and shadow, silence stitched with the distant rhythm of the sea. The girl who will become queen lies awake, listening. Not to lullabies, but to history itself breathing through the stone walls. She has always been a listener. Since childhood, Cleopatra learned that in Alexandria, the loudest voice is rarely the most powerful. Power hums beneath conversation, and glances, pauses, the curl of a smile. She listens when the scholars argue in the gardens about geometry, when the priests debate the will of Isis, when her father's advisors whisper about Rome in tones they think she can't understand. She listens, and she remembers everything. When dawn finally spills through the latticed shutters, it paints her chamber in honey and rose. The air is already warm, heavy with the perfume of myrrh and crushed lotus. From somewhere below, she can hear the cries of merchants setting up in the royal harbor, fishermen shouting in Egyptian, traders in Greek, a babble of tongues that sounds like the heartbeat of the city. This is her Alexandria, the city of 7 districts, crowned with marble and dust, the crossroads of the world. She rises quietly, bare feet on cool stone, and walks to the balcony. The sun climbs out of the sea, gilding the masts of ships and the domes of temples. Beyond them, the lighthouse of Pharaoh still burns, its smoke curling upward into the pale sky. It is said the fire never goes out, that it mirrors the light of the goddess Isis herself, who keeps watch over sailors and kings alike. Below, the streets awaken. The clatter of carts, the bray of donkeys, the laughter of children chasing each other through the colonnades. Perfumed women in linen robes buy garlands of flowers from boys with sunburnt faces. Priests sweep the steps of the Serapeum temple, chanting to the rising sun. And through it all, the Nile moves, slow, steady, eternal, carrying silt and life through a land that has worshipped it longer than memory. Cleopatra watches it all as though watching her own reflection. This city is her inheritance. Its marble and sand will shape her, test her, betray her, and she loves it already fiercely. In the royal palace, education is survival disguised as luxury. Every morning, tutors arrive bearing scrolls, wax tablets, and unshakable patience. There is Theon, the mathematician, who teaches her to measure the heavens and the earth. There is Philostratus, the rhetorician, who drills her in the art of speech, how to persuade without pleading, how to smile while she conquers. And there is an Egyptian priest named Imhotep, old as dust and twice as stern, who insists she learn the sacred tongue of the hieroglyphs. Your ancestors forgot this language, he tells her one afternoon, his voice rough like papyrus. They ruled Egypt with Greek words. But the gods will not listen to those who do not speak their names. Cleopatra listens. She learns to shape the sounds with her mouth, to draw the words like paintings. Falcon for Horus, Ankh for life, Cobra for royalty. It comes to her quickly, naturally. Perhaps the gods are listening after all. Within a few years, she can read the ancient prayers carved into temple walls, words her father cannot understand. That secret knowledge fills her with a quiet pride. The first of her line to truly speak to Egypt, not merely rule it. Her days unfold like the petals of a lotus, bright, deliberate, precise. In the mornings, she studies in the cool shade of the palace gardens, where fountains murmur and peacocks cry from their marble perches. In the afternoons, she walks among the scholars of the Museum, the living heart of Alexandria's intellect, a place where the world's greatest minds argue beneath vaulted ceilings lined with scrolls. The library stands nearby, its air thick with dust and wisdom. Thousands upon thousands of papyri fill its halls, poems from Greece, medicine from India, histories from Persia. Cleopatra loves the smell of it, old ink, cedar, oil lamps burning low. She moves through its corridors as though through a temple. In a way, it is one. Once, when she is 13, she watches 2 philosophers debating whether the earth orbits the sun. They argue for hours until one storms off in indignation, declaring that the truth is obvious to any sane man. Which is it? She asks quietly when he leaves. The older philosopher looks at her, a small girl with dark eyes too knowing for her age, and smiles. No one knows, child. But perhaps someday, someone like you will find out. She never forgets that. At court, though, her lessons are less noble. The royal household is a theater of intrigue. Her father's courtiers, Greek nobles in silk robes and jeweled sandals, speak in compliments that bite like scorpions. They laugh too loudly, bow too low, always watching one another from the corners of their eyes. Her half-sisters practice smiles like blades. Servants trade gossip like currency. The air itself seems perfumed with suspicion. Cleopatra learns quickly. She learns that generosity can be a trap. That kindness, when wielded wisely, can be sharper than cruelty. That to survive among vipers, one must learn to dance without getting bitten. Sometimes, when her tutors dismiss her for the day, she sneaks away to the servants' quarters or the bustling markets near the harbor. There, the air smells of salt and smoke and sweat. Sailors haul ropes thick with tar. Women sell figs from baskets woven with reeds. Cats wander between stalls like tiny gods expecting worship. The people do not recognize her at first. She wears a plain linen robe, her hair loose, her accent softened. She listens to them, to the fishermen cursing the tides, the mothers haggling for bread, the storytellers reciting tales of the old pharaohs. These voices anchor her to something larger than marble and politics. They are the pulse of Egypt itself. And as she grows older, she begins to sense the gulf between the rulers and the ruled, between her family's golden isolation and the raw life outside their gates. One evening, after returning from the city, she finds her father waiting in the audience hall, surrounded by musicians and Roman envoys. He smells of wine and anxiety. He waves her closer. "Come, daughter," he says, voice warm and unsteady. "You should meet our friends from Rome. The gods of the world wear togas now." The envoys bow slightly, a mockery of respect. Cleopatra bows in return, her mind racing. She can feel their gaze linger not on her father's crown, but on the marble floors beneath it, as though measuring how much of Egypt's wealth could be carried back across the sea. She smiles anyway, because she has already learned that silence can be a weapon sharper than any sword. When the Romans leave, her father begins to play his flute, soft, mournful notes drifting through the hall. Cleopatra sits beside him on the dais, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. "Why do we need them?" she asks. He sighs. "Because the world changes, my dear. Greece fades. Egypt sleeps. And Rome wakes hungry." She listens to the tremor in his voice, to the resignation that laces his words. She knows what he doesn't say, that his crown is no longer his own, that the Ptolemies rule at Rome's pleasure. She looks up at him, this fragile man who loves music more than politics, and feels both pity and resolve. If she must inherit his crown, she will not inherit his fear. That night, as torches flicker against the polished stone of her chamber, she sits by the open window and writes in wax with a stylus. Not poetry, not prayers, plans. Lists of names, languages, alliances. The mind of a child sharpening into that of a strategist. Outside, the sea murmurs against the shore. The lighthouse fire blazes. The stars shimmer like grains of gold scattered across the velvet sky. She feels the pull of destiny again, faint, familiar, inevitable. There are gentler moments too. Afternoons spent floating on the palace lake, drifting among lotus blossoms, her laughter echoing against the water. Evenings in the gardens where musicians pluck lyres while courtiers dance in candlelight. The scent of jasmine thick in the air, the Nile breeze brushing her skin like a secret. But even in those moments, her mind never truly rests. The games of power run beneath everything, as constant as the river. She begins to see life itself as a current, swift, merciless, beautiful, and she learns to swim with it rather than against. She grows taller, her voice deepens, her gaze steadies. Servants begin to lower their eyes when she passes, not out of duty, but out of something close to awe. The palace whispers her name with reverence now, and a hint of fear. Cleopatra, the daughter who listens, the child of Alexandria. When she turns 15, a new tension grips the palace. Rumors drift like smoke, the treasury is empty, the Roman envoys impatient, the priests restless. Her father's flute falls silent. His smile grows brittle. Cleopatra watches as her family begins to fracture under the weight of debt and suspicion. Her sister Berenice grows bold, gathering supporters who whisper that the king is unfit to rule. Soldiers choose sides in secret. The court smells of panic. Cleopatra stands at the edge of it all, calm and unshaken. She knows the storm is coming, that soon, the games of childhood will end. And when it does, when her father flees into exile and blood stains the marble floors, she will remember these years, the scent of papyrus and sea salt, the lessons in the gardens, the warmth of the Nile against her skin. The city that taught her how to think, how to watch, how to endure. For it is Alexandria that shaped her, its contradictions, its beauty, its hunger for greatness. It gave her mind, her poise, her voice. It gave her the armor she will need when the gods themselves begin to take sides. The sun sinks behind the city now, turning the sea the color of bronze. From the harbor, the ships of Rome wait, silent, patient, inevitable. The sound of the wind through the palm trees carries the murmur of a prophecy unspoken. Cleopatra leans against the balcony rail, her hair stirring in the breeze. Below her, Alexandria glows, lanterns reflected in water, laughter drifting from the taverns, prayers rising from the temples. Her city. Her heart. Soon she will lose it. And then she will take it back. But for now, she stands in the gathering dusk, the girl who listens, the child of Alexandria, and watches the first stars blink alive over the Pharos fire. The sea breathes. The torches tremble. And history, somewhere beyond the horizon, begins to turn its gaze toward her. The air of Alexandria changes with the seasons, but inside the palace, time feels trapped, folded in upon itself like silk. The child of Alexandria is no longer a child. Her steps echo differently now in the marble corridors. People pause when she passes. Her gaze has become stiller, sharper. Servants who once laughed softly in her presence now bow their heads in silence, sensing the quiet gravity that follows her. She is 16. And the girl who once listened to the whispers of the marketplace now listens to the heartbeat of an empire. Outside, the city thrums like a living creature. Alexandria, the thinking heart of the ancient world, never truly sleeps. From the windows of the royal palace, Cleopatra can see the library's marble colonnades gleaming in the morning light, the scholars already gathered in their cloisters of debate. The air hums with questions, the shape of the heavens, the measure of time, the origin of storms. Here, men try to decipher the mind of the gods with ink and geometry. And she, their queen-to-be, moves among them like a star they cannot chart. Cleopatra no longer sits as a pupil. She stands as an equal. Her tutors, once stern and patient, now speak to her as they would to a colleague. Her knowledge has ripened into something formidable: mathematics, astronomy, medicine, linguistics. The disciplines that ruled her childhood have fused into a single thing: power born of understanding. Imagine her, seated in the cool shade of the palace gardens, scrolls unfurled across a low cedar table. The air smells of ink and wet stone. Around her, a handful of the city's greatest minds lean in as she explains, in fluent Greek, a new theory she has been reading: how the moon's reflected light governs the rhythms of the Nile. They listen, captivated not only by the precision of her words but by the calm authority with which she speaks them. Cleopatra's mind, like the river, is both deep and restless. She drifts between languages as easily as others breathe. Greek for the philosophers, Latin for the Roman envoys, Egyptian for her priests and people. Aramaic, Hebrew, Median, even the tongues of Nubia and Syria, each one another doorway into influence. It is said that she spoke more than half a dozen languages without an interpreter. Imagine the advantage of that. In every council, every negotiation, no secret was safe, no tone or nuance lost. Her brothers do not share this gift. They play at politics like boys in a courtyard. Her sister, Berenice, had passion but not patience, and it was that impatience that ended her. When their father fled Alexandria, she seized the throne for herself, calling herself queen. But the Romans returned him with soldiers and silver. Her rebellion ended with a blade. Cleopatra did not cry, she took notes. That was the year the scholar became a strategist. Each morning now begins with ritual. The priests of Isis arrive before dawn, their linen robes brushed with gold dust, chanting prayers in the ancient tongue. Cleopatra joins them, her voice steady and low, her palms raised toward the rising sun. The torches flicker across her face, and for a moment she seems more than mortal, Isis reborn, the divine made flesh. She knows exactly what it means to be seen this way. Her ancestors had ruled Egypt as foreigners, Greeks on a borrowed throne. But Cleopatra intends something different. She will not only rule Egypt, she will belong to it. She visits the temples, not as spectacle but as supplicant. She listens to the priests, touches the carved hieroglyphs, learns the stories of gods older than her language. She finances the restoration of shrines long abandoned. In every act, she weaves herself deeper into the land's memory. The people begin to whisper her name not in fear or obligation, but with something closer to love. Pharaoh, they call her. The true daughter of Isis. It is an illusion she crafts carefully, but one rooted in truth. For she understands that power is not held by armies alone. It is held in the mind, and in the myth. One afternoon, she walks through the great library, the air thick with dust and sandalwood. The light falls through high windows and golden columns. She runs her fingers along the spines of scrolls older than her bloodline. Texts from Babylon, poems from Athens, treatises from far India. A young philosopher approaches her with trembling hands, presenting a fresh translation of Homer's Odyssey. Cleopatra accepts it, unrolling the parchment, scanning the first lines. "Tell me, O Muse," she murmurs in Greek, "of the man of many wiles." Her lips curve faintly. "Perhaps the Muses will forgive us for being women of many wiles." The scholars laugh softly, nervously. But she means it. Cleverness, in her world, is a weapon sharper than bronze. When her father dies, his debts paid to Rome in gold and humiliation, Cleopatra inherits a kingdom poisoned by uncertainty. She is 18, her brother 10, and they are crowned co-rulers by tradition. But everyone knows where the true power lies. Her coronation takes place in the great temple of Isis at Philae, where priests anoint her with sacred oils that smell of frankincense and honey. She stands beneath the painted stars of the temple ceiling, the crook and flail crossed over her chest, the double crown heavy on her brow. The air hums with drums and chant, the river outside shimmering in sunlight. When the priests hail her as Pharaoh, she closes her eyes, and imagines the lineage of all those who came before her. Not the jealous sisters or cowardly brothers, but the goddesses and warrior queens whose spirits she now carries, Nefertiti, Hatshepsut, Isis herself. When she opens her eyes, she is no longer merely Cleopatra, daughter of Ptolemy. She is Egypt. Her reign begins with hunger. The Nile floods poorly, and the people suffer. Grain grows scarce, and rumors spread that the gods are displeased. Her brother's advisors whisper that she is too young, too foreign, too proud. She answers not with words but with action. While others hide in their villas, she walks among the markets, veiled, listening to the people's grievances. She opens the royal granaries and orders that bread be distributed freely. She sells her own jewelry to buy more grain. When the priests bless her in the temple square, the crowds cheer. For the first time in generations, Egypt sees a pharaoh who does not hide behind marble walls. She has become scholar and sovereign, logic and legend entwined. But her brother's court begins to turn against her. His advisors, eager to reclaim influence, spread rumors that she has defied the traditions of their ancestors, that her affection for Egypt's native gods is blasphemy, that she consorts with foreign philosophers and sorcerers. Her brother, young and malleable, listens. The palace becomes dangerous. Spies trail her in the halls. Notes vanish from her chambers. One night, her most trusted servant disappears into the dark and never returns. Cleopatra understands what this means. The scholar queen must become a survivor. She flees into the desert under cover of night, disguised in a cloak of coarse wool. The wind howls over the dunes, biting at her skin, filling her mouth with salt and sand. Behind her, the lights of Alexandria fade into nothing. Ahead, the desert stretches endless and gold beneath the moon. She does not weep. She does not pray. She rides. The caravan that carries her passes through the wastes of Sinai, where stars burn bright as molten silver. The air smells of dust and fear. Her companions, loyal generals and scribes, speak little. They know this exile may mean death. But Cleopatra endures. Each night, she reads by torchlight, scrolls balanced on her knees, her face half shadowed by the flame. She studies not poetry now, but war. She learns the strategies of Alexander, the campaigns of Cyrus, the treaties of Carthage. She learns how power is lost, and how it is taken back. In the day's brutal heat, she walks among her soldiers, shares their water, listens to their stories. She binds herself to them not as queen, but as equal. They will remember that. And somewhere in the darkness of that exile, the scholar becomes something new. She becomes dangerous. Months later, when she sets her eyes once more on the blue line of the Nile, her army marches behind her. Her banners bear the winged son of Ra. Her chariots glint like blades in the dawn. She is 21 now. Older. Harder. The girl who once traced constellations on wax tablets has become a living constellation of will and purpose. Ahead lies Alexandria, still glittering, still treacherous. And within its walls, a palace now occupied by her brother's men, and by foreigners. Romans. They say Julius Caesar himself has landed on her shores, come to settle the dispute between the young king and his banished sister. To most, it would be a moment of dread. To Cleopatra, it is opportunity, a question she has been preparing to answer her whole life. She has studied the minds of philosophers, the rhetoric of generals, the histories of empires. She knows the logic of men who believe themselves invincible. Now she will test it. The scholar queen rides toward the city she loves and lost, her hair whipping in the desert wind, her eyes fixed on the lighthouse flame gleaming in the distance like a promise. Knowledge has brought her this far. But it will take something more than intellect to reclaim her throne. Something that neither her tutors nor her gods ever taught her. Something she must now learn for herself, how to turn wisdom into power, and power into destiny. The wind carries the scent of the sea. The first gull cries overhead. Alexandria rises from the horizon like a mirage returning to life. Cleopatra smiles faintly. The scholar has come home. And the world, though it does not yet know it, is about to change forever. The desert wind tastes of copper and old storms. It moves over the dunes like a breath from the gods, restless, endless, indifferent. Cleopatra rides at the front of her small company, her linen cloak snapping in the wind, her face veiled against the sting of sand. Behind her trail a few dozen loyal soldiers and scribes, what remains of her retinue. The young queen who once debated scholars beneath marble columns is now a figure of dust and resolve. Alexandria is far behind her, its white towers now only a shimmer in the haze of memory. She does not allow herself to look back. To look back is to grieve, and grief is a luxury for those who still have safety. The desert teaches her something the palace never could: silence. In the palace, silence meant plotting. Here, it means survival. At night, the sand cools beneath her feet, the stars sharpening until the sky feels close enough to touch. The constellations she once traced on wax tablets burn above her now, the same pattern she studied by lamplight as a child. Orion, the hunter. Sirius, the dog star. Isis, the divine mother. They look unchanged, eternal, but she has changed utterly. She lies awake in her tent, the air smelling of smoke and sweat, the low murmur of soldiers outside speaking softly in Egyptian. They think she sleeps. Instead, she listens, as always, catching their doubts, their loyalty, their fear. A ruler who stops listening stops ruling. She knows that now more than ever. When she closes her eyes, Alexandria rises again behind them, the marble steps of the library, the perfume of myrrh from the temples, her father's music echoing through empty halls. All the beauty she lost. All the promises Rome broke. And then she remembers her sister Berenice's execution, how her father's soldiers had dragged her screaming from the throne room. The memory steals her spine. "I will not be another story told by men," she whispers into the dark. The words become a vow. Months pass. She moves through the oases of the eastern desert, gathering allies like seeds scattered on wind. She meets Nabatean merchants with camels loaded in gold cloth, desert chieftains who still remember the favor of Egypt, mercenaries hardened by years of frontier war. To each, she offers not coin, but something rarer, purpose. Egypt, she tells them, is dying, not by sword, but by surrender. The gods have turned their faces away. She means to make them look again. They listen, these men who once served for silver and bread. They see the fire in her eyes, the calm certainty in her voice. They follow. By the time she reaches the border near Pelusium, she has an army, not vast, but loyal. Each soldier bound to her not by birthright, but belief. And yet, she knows force alone will not win back her crown. Rome sits now within Alexandria's gates. Julius Caesar, general of legions, the conqueror of Gaul, has come to arbitrate the quarrel between two royal children. Her brother, Ptolemy XIII, has the advantage of proximity, and of Rome's soldiers already stationed in the city. But Cleopatra has something her brother will never possess: imagination. The desert breaks at last into the green marshlands of the Nile Delta. Reeds sway in the humid wind, waterbirds scatter in flashes of white. The air smells of mud and life. It feels like breathing again after drowning. She rides through it slowly, tasting the river air, remembering the rhythm of home. The Nile gleams like a blade under the sun. Somewhere upstream, its waters touch the stones of Memphis and Thebes, and beyond that, the tombs of her ancestors. Each ripple, each shimmer of light on water, feels like a message. You have not been forgotten. She camps near the old fortress of Pelusium, waiting for news from the city. Her scouts bring word that Caesar has taken residence in the royal palace itself. Her brother's forces encircle the compound, keeping the Roman trapped inside, though no one truly believes Caesar can ever be trapped. The soldiers whisper that he is both ruthless and brilliant, a man whose victories march ahead of him like heralds. The Senate fears him. His enemies plot against him. And yet, they say, he moves with the confidence of someone convinced the gods themselves will not dare defy him. Cleopatra listens, her expression unreadable. "Then we must give him something the gods cannot," she says at last. Surprise. The plan forms quietly, perfectly. She cannot simply march into Alexandria with an army. Her brother's men would seize or kill her before she reached the palace. She must enter unseen, like smoke slipping through stone. So she chooses audacity. One night, beneath a sickle moon, she and a handful of trusted guards board a small river boat. The sails are stripped. The oars move silently through the black water. The city glows ahead, golden and fevered, every window lit by torchlight. Alexandria still sings at night, the hum of taverns, the laughter of sailors, the low drone of flutes drifting through the harbor air. She watches it approach, heart steady. When they dock at the royal quay, she dons the simplest of robes, her hair bound tight beneath a cloth. She carries nothing but a small pack and a single jeweled dagger. Her servant Apollodorus waits in the shadows of the dockyard, beside a long, rolled carpet meant for a Roman general's chambers. He looks at her, unsure whether to laugh or bow. "My queen," he murmurs. "Are you certain of this?" "If I am to regain my throne," she answers, "I must first enter my cage." And with a faint smile, half daring, half serenity, she lies down, folds her arms, and lets him wrap her in linen and wool. The bundle is carried through the palace gates, past guards who salute the Roman eagle without question, through corridors that smell of oil and dust and the faint salt of the sea. At last, the doors of Caesar's chamber open. Torches flicker. The air is heavy with perfume. Apollodorus sets down the carpet and bows low. "A gift," he says, "from Queen Cleopatra of Egypt." The general raises an eyebrow, amused. He gestures for it to be unrolled. And as the folds spill open across the marble floor, a figure rises from within, dark eyes gleaming beneath the torchlight, hair falling in waves around her shoulders. For a heartbeat, there is only silence. Then Cleopatra speaks, her voice calm as the Nile itself. "General Caesar," she says, "I thought it best we meet without witnesses." The room seems to inhale. No historian can say what passed between them in that first hour. Only that when dawn came, the young queen who had arrived as a fugitive remained as a guest. Caesar, who had faced kings, senators, and entire nations, found himself disarmed by this woman who carried both wit and weariness in her gaze. He admired boldness, she embodied it. He spoke of order and destiny, she spoke of Egypt and eternity. Their conversation, they say, lasted until the lamps burned out and the sea turned silver with morning. By sunrise, Caesar had promised to mediate peace between Cleopatra and her brother, not as conqueror, but as judge. Yet every Roman in Alexandria understood what that meant. The city now had two rulers, and only one slept beneath Caesar's roof. Cleopatra walks again through her palace, now guarded by Roman soldiers. The same corridors that once whispered treachery now echo with the ring of armor and Latin commands. But she moves among them unafraid, her head high. Rome has not conquered her, it has been invited in. She watches Caesar closely. She studies him as she once studied philosophers, his gestures, his temper, his vanity. She learns the architecture of his mind brick by brick. And when he speaks of the Republic, she answers in the language of empires. They become, in time, more than allies. But that lies still ahead. For now, she is focused on one thing: restoring Egypt. Her brother's army gathers beyond the walls, determined to drive out both the queen and her Roman protector. The city trembles under siege. Smoke rises from the harbor. Arrows arc across the night like falling stars. Cleopatra does not flee this time. She walks the ramparts beside Caesar, her gold diadem catching the firelight. The soldiers cheer her name in both tongues, Cleopatra. Basileia, the queen. And when victory comes, swift, brutal, decisive, it feels less like conquest than rebirth. Her brother's body is found at the Nile's edge, drowned beneath the weight of his own armor. The war is over. Egypt breathes again. In the weeks that follow, the palace fills once more with light. The great halls are cleaned, the fountains run clear, the music returns. But something within Cleopatra has changed forever. She no longer feels at home among marble and silk. The desert has left its mark, a calm born of hardship, a stillness forged in fire. She moves through her court like a woman walking between two worlds, one of intellect and order, the other of instinct and survival. Her people, once divided, now see her as both scholar and warrior, mother and monarch. And somewhere deep within, she knows this is only the beginning. The world has turned its gaze toward her, and she will not look away. The exile has ended. The queen has returned. The night hums softly above Alexandria, thick with the scent of oil and salt and smoke. Somewhere in the harbor, the waves slap against marble docks where Roman triremes sleep in the dark, their bronze rams glinting under torchlight. In the palace above, the air is motionless. A candle flickers against polished alabaster, throwing shifting gold across the mosaic floor. Cleopatra stands by the open balcony, her linen gown stirring in the faint sea breeze. Below her, the city is quiet, a strange, temporary peace after months of chaos. And somewhere within these same walls, the man who holds her future, and perhaps Rome's, waits for her. Julius Caesar. The conqueror of Gaul, the darling of the legions, the man who crossed the Rubicon and bent a republic toward empire. In every rumor told across the Mediterranean, he is part god, part wolf. Yet when she meets him, he does not seem a monster, nor a deity, but something rarer still, a man utterly sure of his own destiny. That first night, after her daring entrance from the carpet, their conversation runs like a current. The torches burn low, shadows deepening around them. Cleopatra stands barefoot on the cool marble, her voice calm, her gaze unwavering. Caesar listens, his fingers idly tracing the rim of a wine cup. He is older than she expected, lines around the eyes, a touch of gray in the hair, but his presence is sharp as iron. She tells him of her brother's betrayal, of Rome's greedy envoys who sold Egypt piece by piece, of the famine and fear that now strangle her people. He asks few questions, but she can see the calculation behind his silence, the mind that measures kingdoms as others measure coin. At last she leans forward and says, "You came to judge between two monarchs, Caesar. But Egypt has only ever known one queen." The corner of his mouth curves, just slightly. "And that queen hides in carpets?" Cleopatra lets the words linger before answering, only until it is time to strike. He laughs, a low, genuine sound that surprises even him. "Then perhaps we understand each other." Over the days that follow, they dined together in the cool chambers overlooking the sea. Roman officers whisper disapproval, Egyptian courtiers pretend not to watch. But neither seems to care. They walk the gardens at dusk, their steps echoing through columns carved with the stories of gods. She shows him the fountains that never run dry, the sacred ibis that stalk the lotus pools, the inscriptions older than memory. He speaks of campaigns and laws, of the vastness of the Roman world. Their words twine like the paths of the garden, crossing, parting, meeting again. She studies him the way she once studied the philosophers of the library, patiently, curiously, with the precision of a scholar dissecting a text. Caesar, for all his fame, is a man divided, the soldier who dreams of poetry, the statesman who worships order yet thrives in chaos. He speaks of Rome as a father might speak of a difficult child, loving it, fearing it, desperate to shape it. Cleopatra listens, seeing the cracks behind the marble mask. "You speak of power as though it were duty," she says one evening. "But power is never a burden, Caesar. It is a choice." He turns to her, amused. "You speak boldly for one who has only just reclaimed her throne. I speak as one who has learned the cost of silence." They begin to share meals in private. He asks her to read from Egyptian poetry. She recites the hymn to Isis in its native tongue, her voice low and resonant. He cannot understand the words, but he feels the rhythm, the cadence of something older than Latin itself. When she finishes, he murmurs, "The gods of Egypt are not shy." She smiles faintly. "Nor are its queens. Theirs is not yet love, not the careless kind, but a meeting of mirrors. Each sees in the other a reflection of what they might become." He sees ambition wrapped in beauty, intellect tempered by charm. She sees authority unburdened by doubt, a man who moves through the world as if it already belongs to him. In him, she senses protection and opportunity. In her, he senses immortality. And so a partnership begins, half alliance, half fascination. Outside their quiet rooms, the world boils. The streets of Alexandria are filled with soldiers, Greek and Egyptian, Roman and mercenary, their armor clattering through the narrow lanes. Smoke from burning ships drifts through the harbor. The sea glows orange at night. Cleopatra's brother, Ptolemy XIII, refuses to surrender. He has allied himself with Achillas, a ruthless general who commands the city's garrison. Together they lay siege to the royal quarter where Caesar and Cleopatra now reside. The palace becomes a fortress. Caesar's legions, trapped in a foreign city, fight street by street. Arrows arc over the courtyards. Catapults groan against the walls. The library itself catches fire, its scrolls curling into ash that rains over the sea like black snow. Cleopatra watches from a terrace as the flames devour the knowledge of centuries. For a moment, her composure breaks. "The words of the world," she whispers. "All lost." Caesar stands beside her, the fire reflected in his eyes. "We can rebuild the walls," he says softly, "but not the men who will write them again." Perhaps in that instant she understands him completely, the man who can conquer nations but still mourn the loss of thought. Through the chaos, they cling to each other, not from romance alone, but survival. When famine grips the city, she shares her grain stores with the Roman troops. When Caesar's men begin to despair, she walks among them, offering bread, smiles, and words they cannot understand but somehow find comforting. The soldiers begin to call her Regina Sapienti, the wise queen. And when word arrives that reinforcements from Syria are on their way to crush them, she does not flinch. "Then we fight," she says. "Better to die as Pharaoh than live as prisoner." Caesar looks at her for a long moment, then nods. "You were born in the wrong republic." The battle that follows turns the harbor red. Roman galleys ram the ships of Ptolemy's fleet. The sound of splintering wood echoes across the bay. The air reeks of smoke and brine. Cleopatra watches from the palace tower, her hands gripping the balcony rail, her heart steady as iron. Below, Caesar's standard, the eagle, still flies. Against all odds, the Romans push their enemies back toward the Nile. In the chaos, Ptolemy's barge overturns. His gilded armor drags him down, glittering briefly beneath the water before disappearing into the green depths. The war is over. When Caesar returns to the palace, grime on his skin and blood on his cloak, Cleopatra meets him in the great hall lit by the last light of sunset. For a moment neither speaks. The silence between them is not awkward, it is complete. "You have your throne," he says at last. "And you," she answers, "have Egypt." He steps closer. "No," he murmurs. "I have you." Their bond deepens in the months that follow, sealed not just in passion but in politics. Together, they tour the country, sailing up the Nile in a royal barge adorned with silk sails and gold prow. The people line the riverbanks to see them, their queen reborn, their pharaoh restored, her Roman companion radiant beside her. The journey becomes legend before it even ends. Poets will later claim that the gods themselves watched their voyage, the sun god Ra steering their path, the goddess Isis smiling from the reeds. But beneath the poetry lies precision. Every stop along the river is calculated. Cleopatra visits the temples of the old gods, offering sacrifices and decrees in the Egyptian tongue. She renews the ancient rituals long neglected by her forebears. She rebuilds trust between crown and country, between ruler and divine. Caesar observes, fascinated. "You rule by worship," he says. "No," she replies. "I rule by memory. Egypt has forgotten what it is. I remind it." In her presence, even Caesar, who has crossed half the known world, feels small before the weight of time. Rome is new, bright, restless. Egypt is eternal. And he, for all his conquests, begins to sense that this woman, this land, may conquer him in ways no army ever could. By the time they return to Alexandria, the city has changed. The people greet her with garlands, not weapons. The priests hail her as the living Isis. And when she gives birth months later to a son, Ptolemy Caesar, whom the people call Caesar Ion, the city erupts in celebration. To Rome, it is scandal. To Egypt, it is salvation, a child born of both worlds, heir to two empires. But for Cleopatra, it is something else entirely. She looks down at the infant in her arms, the child of a scholar queen and a Roman god, and feels, perhaps for the first time, a flicker of peace. Yet somewhere deep within that peace, a shadow lingers. She knows Rome's love is fickle, and its hunger endless. The same legions that fight for her today may march against her tomorrow. Still, she smiles. She has lived through exile and flame, through betrayal and return. She has won not just a throne, but a partner whose name shakes the world. And as she stands once more on the balcony above the sea, the torches of Alexandria blazing below, Cleopatra knows this. The story of her life has only just begun. The Nile glides like a ribbon of bronze beneath the morning sun, its surface scattered with drifting petals from the temples upstream. On its slow-moving waters sails the royal barge, a vessel of cedar and gold, its prow shaped like the head of a falcon. Silk canopies billow in the soft breeze, carrying the faint scent of lotus and incense. Inside, the queen reclines among embroidered cushions, her gaze fixed on the horizon where water and sky melt into one eternal shimmer. Caesar stands beside her, a figure cut from history's hard stone. His armor gleams, his cloak deep crimson, yet there is something human in the way he watches her, like a man watching fire, fascinated, wary, helpless to look away. This voyage down the Nile is no mere pleasure. It is theater. Every ripple, every gesture, every offering along the banks is a message written for the watching world. Love and power now flow in the same current. Cleopatra understands this better than any philosopher ever could. In Egypt, love is not sentiment, it is symbolism. The divine pair, Isis and Osiris, rule not by affection but by harmony. The joining of man and woman, god and goddess, is the heartbeat of creation itself. She and Caesar are a mirror of that myth, the Roman general as Osiris reborn, the queen as Isis, the eternal feminine who restores life to what conquest has destroyed. Together they are not simply lovers, they are ritual made flesh. When they stop at each city along the river, Memphis, Thebes, Hermopolis, the priests pour offerings of wine and honey. Trumpets sound. The crowds kneel in the dust, crying out prayers not to Egypt's rulers, but to its living gods. And the people believe, truly believe, that heaven itself has smiled upon this union. Caesar plays his part well. He accepts the bowing priests and garlanded oxen with imperial grace, even as his Roman discipline fights the intoxication of it all. But Cleopatra, she glows in this light. Here, she is in her element, adored, divine, necessary. When she lifts her arms to bless the crowd, when the sunlight catches on her golden crown, she becomes not merely queen, but symbol. The woman who can command both love and empire. At night, the desert hums beyond the riverbanks, and the barge drifts through still waters lit only by oil lamps and the wide scatter of stars. Inside her cabin, Cleopatra speaks softly, almost as if thinking aloud. "You Romans believe conquest builds peace," she says. "But what peace can come from a sword?" Caesar looks up from the scroll in his hands. "Peace is not born from love, my queen. It is born from obedience." She smiles faintly. "Then you have never ruled Egyptians." "We obey our gods, not our generals. And our gods love us fiercely." He studies her for a long moment. "And what of you? Do you love them?" Her eyes hold the lamplight. "I am them." For the first time, Caesar says nothing. He understands that this woman's authority runs deeper than politics. It draws from the oldest currents of faith and myth, a lineage Rome cannot replicate. He begins to realize that while he commands men, she commands belief. There are moments, quiet ones, when politics slips away. When she lies beside him beneath woven linen, the sounds of the Nile whispering through the open curtains. When the air smells of myrrh and cedar, and the world beyond the chamber seems to pause, waiting. In those hours, their differences dissolve. He traces the curve of her shoulder, marveling at her calm, the way she never fawns or flatters. She speaks to him as an equal, sometimes as a rival, sometimes as if she already knows his thoughts. He tells her stories of his youth in Rome, of the battles that shaped him. She listens, her head resting against his chest, her fingers idly drawing patterns across his skin. And when she speaks, it is not of romance, but of empire. "You will return to Rome," she says one night, her voice barely above a whisper. "And they will crown you with laurels, not gold. But they will not love you. They will fear you. The Senate will smile until your back is turned." He laughs quietly. "You sound like an oracle." "An observer," she corrects. "Fear is a poor foundation for power. Love lasts longer. It makes men die willingly." He turns to face her. "And would your people die for you?" She does not hesitate. "They would live for me." Which is harder? Outside, her court begins to mirror the strange harmony between the two rulers. Roman soldiers patrol beside Egyptian guards. Greek scholars dine beside temple priests. It is an uneasy peace, held together by Cleopatra's careful balance of flattery and firmness. She writes decrees in 3 languages, stamps them with her seal, and sends them across the land. Taxes are lowered, temples restored, grain stores replenished. The people begin to prosper again. And always, she ties Caesar's name to her own, 2 suns rising together over the Nile. Rome, of course, watches with growing suspicion. Word reaches the Senate that Caesar spends his days in a foreign queen's embrace, that he wears silk instead of armor, that he forgets himself in the luxury of the East. They call her Regina Meretrix, the harlot queen. But Cleopatra knows the truth. Rome fears what it cannot control. She writes to the Senate in her own hand, in Latin elegant and precise, addressing them not as supplicant but as partner. The message is clear: Egypt may bow to no one, not even to Rome's greatest general. When she bears Caesar's child, the world trembles again. Caesar Ion, they call him, the little Caesar. To her, he is a miracle. To Rome, an inconvenience. The Senate demands he be disavowed, but Caesar does not deny him. He simply remains silent, and in silence, rumor becomes power. Cleopatra has given the conqueror of the world an heir of 2 bloods, Roman and Egyptian, mortal and divine. It is the perfect myth, and she wields it like a blade wrapped in silk. In portraits and temples she appears with the infant on her lap, a living Isis with the child Horus. The message spreads through Egypt like sunlight. The gods have renewed their covenant. The river will rise again. The land will bloom. Even Caesar cannot escape the allure of that image. He sees himself reflected in their faces, the eternal father, the endless legacy. And yet he also sees the danger. The merging of East and West, of goddess and general, could birth not harmony but rebellion. Still he stays. Their final days together in Egypt unfold like the slow descent of evening. He spends his hours planning his return to Rome, where enemies wait and civil war looms. She spends hers strengthening Egypt's foundations, appointing governors, securing borders, rebuilding cities. In the evenings, they dine overlooking the harbor, the lighthouse flame burning steady in the distance. Sometimes they speak of politics, sometimes of stars, sometimes of nothing at all. There is affection between them, yes, but beneath it hums something sharper, 2 great minds testing each other's strength. He is order, she is imagination. He is conquest, she is continuity. Together they are a balance the world cannot yet comprehend. When the time comes for him to leave, the sky hangs low and red over the sea. The harbor is crowded with soldiers and servants, the air thick with farewells. Cleopatra stands at the water's edge, her cloak rippling in the wind, her face unreadable. Caesar steps onto the gangplank, then turns back to her. For a moment, the general disappears, and only the man remains. "I will return for you," he says. "For both of you." She does not answer. She only looks at him, eyes deep as the Nile. Then she bows her head slightly, a gesture both queenly and intimate. When his ship finally disappears into the horizon, she stands there long after the others have gone. The waves brush against her sandals, whispering secrets from the deep. She knows he will return, but not as the same man. Power changes everyone. Love, too, when entwined with empire, becomes something neither can control. Still, she smiles faintly. For even if he forgets her, Rome will not. Rome has 1,000 statues, 1,000 generals. But there will be only one Cleopatra. And long after the marble has cracked and the laurels turn to dust, her name will still gleam like gold beneath the desert sun. Proof that love, when wielded by a queen, can be the sharpest form of politics. The sea that had carried Caesar away lulls itself to silence. The gulls drift low over the harbor, their cries faint, almost reverent. Alexandria exhales, its storms of war and flame now memories, its marble once more washed clean by sunlight. Yet within the royal palace, one room remains still, veiled in twilight and the scent of lotus. Here, the queen sits beside a cradle carved from ebony and gold. In it sleeps a child, swaddled in linen soft as breath. His tiny hands curl around invisible dreams, his lashes tremble like the wings of moths. Cleopatra watches him as if trying to memorize every beat of his heart. The son of two worlds. Outside, priests chant in the courtyards, their voices rising with the rhythm of the Nile. Trumpets sound in the distance, echoing against the limestone walls. The people celebrate not a victory, but a birth, a promise that Egypt, for all its centuries, has been renewed. They say the child's conception was foretold in the stars, that the goddess Isis herself blessed the union of his parents. The Romans scoff, of course. They call him a bastard, a political invention, a whisper of scandal carried across the sea. But to the Egyptians this child is proof that the gods have not abandoned them. Cleopatra calls him Ptolemy Caesar, though the people soon find a simpler name for him, Caesarion. Little Caesar. In his small body, two empires meet. In his blood, the logic of Rome and the soul of the Nile entwine like twin serpents. Cleopatra raises him not as a prince of privilege, but as an heir of purpose. The palace becomes both nursery and academy. Every morning, the child is bathed in water drawn from the sacred river, anointed with oil, and lifted to the rising sun as priests chant blessings of protection. May Ra guide your steps, may Isis guard your breath, may wisdom dwell within you as within your mother. Then come the tutors, Greek philosophers to shape his reason, Egyptian priests to teach him reverence, Nubian warriors to teach him endurance. Cleopatra watches it all closely. She walks among the lessons, her presence soft but commanding. Her son must learn not only to rule, but to understand what he rules. She insists he hear the languages of his people, their songs, their grievances. At night, when the lessons are done, she carries him to the balcony overlooking the sea. Together they watch the stars, the same constellations she once traced as a girl, the same sky that watched her rise from exile. Look, my son, she whispers, pointing to the brightest. That one is your father's star. It burns always above Rome. But the Nile's stars are older. They remember more. Caesarion gurgles, reaching upward, his tiny fingers brushing the air. She smiles. You are of both worlds, my heart. You must learn to make them one. In Rome, news of the child spreads like fire through dry fields. The Senate hisses with scandal, poets mutter verses half in envy, half in outrage. They fear what the boy represents, a future where Caesar's legacy might lie not in their republic, but in a foreign queen's arms. Yet Caesar himself, ever the strategist, does not disown him. He acknowledges Cleopatra publicly, welcomes her to Rome as a guest, and seats her in his triumphal procession. When she arrives in the city, the streets throng with spectators. They come not to praise her, but to see her, the woman who has captured their ruler's heart, the queen who dares to stand beside him without fear. She wears Egyptian gold and linen white as mourning. In her arms the child. Rome falls silent. The poets will later describe that day as if dawn itself had walked through the forum. The senators, their pride wounded, hide their anger behind smiles. They see not a guest, but a warning. This woman, with her voice like silk and her gaze like sunlight, has turned Caesar's heart eastward. And behind her, in the crook of her arm, is the future they cannot control. Cleopatra stays in Rome for nearly a year. Her palace overlooks the Tiber, filled with incense and laughter, foreign music mingling uneasily with Roman restraint. She hosts banquets where senators recline on couches beside philosophers, where Egyptian perfumes and Greek wine blur the boundaries of decorum. But she is no idle guest. Every gesture, every word is deliberate. She moves through Rome's society as through a chessboard, learning its customs, its fears, its weaknesses. She watches Caesar carefully. His triumphs multiply, his ambition swells. The Senate offers him crowns in all but name. His enemies whisper the word tyrant. She sees the shadows gathering long before he does. One evening, as the sun dies behind the hills, she finds him alone, reading by lamplight. His face is weary. "You have won the world," she says quietly, "but not its peace." He does not look up. The world never gives peace, only submission. She touches his shoulder. "Be careful that it does not take from you what it gave." For a moment, he almost smiles. "You speak as though you see the future." "I have lived through too many endings not to recognize another." He studies her then, truly studies her, as if he wants to remember her face. "If anything should happen to me," he begins. She silences him with a finger to his lips. "Then your son will remember who you were, and I will remember who you became." When the Ides of March arrive, she is back in Egypt, the sea wind lifting the sails of her ship. She feels uneasy, the kind of stillness that comes before storms. Days later, a messenger reaches Alexandria, his face pale with the dust of the road. The words spill out like stones: "Caesar is dead. Stabbed beneath the statue of Pompey, betrayed by those who once called him friend." The Republic rises again, but only for a moment before descending into chaos. Cleopatra receives the news in silence. Her court holds its breath. The child, barely 3, sits at her feet, playing with a bronze toy soldier. She watches him quietly, then gathers him into her arms. "Your father has joined the gods," she murmurs. "And now the world will come for us." She does not cry. Grief is a private language, and queens cannot afford to speak it aloud. In the months that follow, she rules with a steadiness that astonishes even her advisors. She strengthens Egypt's borders, renews its trade routes, reestablishes the temples that had fallen silent during war. Her court becomes once more a place of learning and splendor. But in the quiet hours, she watches her son, his face, his gestures, so like Caesar's, and wonders what destiny waits for him. He grows quickly, bright and curious. He learns both Latin and Egyptian, debates with tutors, mimics the gestures of soldiers. He has his father's quick temper and his mother's poise. When he laughs, it fills the halls with the same fierce light that once burned in Rome. She loves him fiercely, but fear shadows that love. For Cleopatra knows too well how empires treat symbols. Her son is not merely a child, he is a claim. And claims are dangerous things. The Senate has divided. Rome now belongs to 3 men: Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir; Antony, his loyal general; and Lepidus, the weakest of the 3. Alliances shift like sand in the desert wind. And in every whispered plot, Cleopatra hears her son's name. One night, unable to sleep, she walks to the balcony overlooking the harbor. The torches of Alexandria shimmer below, their reflections trembling across the water. Behind her, the boy stirs in his bed, murmuring in his dreams. She watches the stars, their ancient constellations unchanging. Somewhere among them burns Caesar's light, eternal and unreachable. "My son," she whispers, "you will have to be more than your father's shadow. You must become his continuation, but not his Rome. You are Egypt's dawn." Her words drift into the night, carried on the sea breeze toward the lighthouse flame that never dies. And far across the Mediterranean, in the marble corridors of Rome, another young man listens to different voices. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, studying maps and names, preparing for the world his father left behind. Two heirs of one legacy. Two stars destined to collide. But for now, in this still hour before dawn, Egypt sleeps beneath its queen's watchful eyes. Within the palace, the boy breathes softly, wrapped in gold and prophecy. The son of two worlds. And though the gods keep their secrets, they surely must have smiled, for they knew what history would forget, that for a brief, perfect moment, the dreams of Rome and the soul of Egypt slept side by side in one small cradle beneath the Alexandrian moon. Morning returns to Alexandria like a rebirth. The harbor stirs under a sky of molten gold, and the sea carries the scent of myrrh and salt to the palace steps. The city is alive again, merchants crying out from their stalls, priests sweeping temple thresholds, children chasing pigeons through columns older than memory. Life, abundant and humming, returns to the kingdom. And above it all, in the halls where the light gathers, Cleopatra sits upon her throne. The Queen of the Nile, reborn. Years have passed since Caesar's death, yet his shadow lingers in every corridor, in every alliance whispered across the sea. But Cleopatra, no longer the fugitive, nor the lover clinging to the edge of empire, has become something else entirely. She is a sovereign in full command of her world. Her son, Caesar Ion, sits beside her now during councils, small but attentive, dressed in miniature robes of white and gold. The courtiers bow to him with reverence that is half devotion, half fear. His very presence reminds them that Egypt's throne no longer bows to Rome, it competes with it. Cleopatra has turned grief into vision. The first years after Caesar's death had been fragile, uncertain. Rome's civil wars shook the world like thunder. Yet while others fought for the ashes of power, she rebuilt. The queen moves through her kingdom with precision and purpose, as if restoring harmony to a broken instrument. She reforms the tax system, ending the corruption that had hollowed her father's reign. She opens the granaries to the poor during famine. She revives the ports of Berenice and Neos Hormuz, turning them into gates of trade that stretch as far as India and Ethiopia. Ships sail from Alexandria laden with glass, papyrus, perfumes, and grain, returning with silk, incense, and gold. The Nile's current becomes her bloodstream, carrying her influence from delta to desert. In every act, she binds Egypt's prosperity to her name. Her court becomes legend once more, the most dazzling in the known world. Ambassadors arrive from distant lands, Parthians draped in embroidered wool, Nabateans scented with frankincense, envoys from Kush wearing headdresses of feathers and bronze. They enter the throne room and find her seated beneath a canopy of blue silk, her face serene, her voice low but commanding. She speaks to each in their own language, her words precise, her tone laced with that rare power that makes obedience feel like devotion. She has learned that rule is not about fear, but fascination. When the foreign envoys depart, they speak not only of Egypt's wealth, but of its queen, a woman who can read the stars and balance kingdoms with the same hand. Rome may have its armies, but Egypt has her. The queen's days unfold like ritual. At dawn, she enters the temple of Isis, barefoot upon the cool stone, offering milk and honey to the goddess she mirrors. The priests chant her name in rhythm with the rising sun. She does not pretend to be divine. She embodies the idea of divinity, so seamlessly that the line between myth and flesh fades. By midday, she holds council in the palace gardens. Philosophers debate geometry under palm trees. Mathematicians trace equations on sand. Engineers discuss new ways to channel the Nile's floodwaters. Cleopatra listens, questions, and directs, her mind as sharp as the bronze instruments in their hands. At night, the palace transforms into something like a living constellation. Oil lamps flicker against mosaics of lapis and gold. Musicians play lyres and flutes in winding melodies. Wine from Crete, figs from Nubia, spices from India, everything flows to her table, and every guest knows that presence at her banquets is not indulgence but privilege. And yet, amid all the glitter and laughter, Cleopatra remains centered, detached. Her joy is never careless, her laughter always calculated. Every display of beauty is a declaration of power. She knows eyes are always watching, Roman, Egyptian, divine. The city itself becomes her reflection. She commissions new temples to Isis and Serapis, new gardens, new fountains. Statues of her likeness rise along the quays, carved not in Greek perfection but in Egyptian style, the cobra crown curling above her brow. Children in the streets carry amulets of her image. Women trace her name in the dust before prayers. To her people, Cleopatra is not just ruler but rhythm, the pulse of a land that has finally remembered how to live. And beneath that grace, she prepares for what she knows must come. Rome is never still. The Republic has become a battlefield once more, Octavian and Mark Antony now fighting over the ghost of Caesar's legacy. Cleopatra watches from afar, reading every dispatch that crosses her desk, every rumor that rides the merchant ships. She knows the pattern of Rome's chaos. She has lived within it. And she knows that soon, one of these men will come to Egypt, not as enemy, but as suitor. When that day comes, she intends to meet him not as widow or relic, but as sovereign. Her counselors urge caution. Rome consumes all it touches, they warn. Do not let it swallow Egypt again. She smiles. Rome has teeth, she replies, but I have venom. One evening, she stands on the balcony overlooking the Pharos lighthouse. The sunset paints the water crimson and gold, as if the Nile itself were bleeding light. Caesar Ion plays nearby, tracing letters in the air with a reed pen. Mother, he asks, will Rome come for us? She looks down at him, and her expression softens. Rome always comes, she says. The question is, do we wait, or do we call it to us? He frowns slightly, trying to understand. And what will you do? She brushes a strand of his hair aside, smiling faintly. I will remind them that Egypt does not bow. It invites. The boy nods, serious beyond his years. Like the gods? Exactly. She whispers. Like the gods. The wind stirs the torches, and for a moment the flames bend toward her, as if in reverence. In the years that follow, her kingdom flourishes like a lotus opening to the sun. The harvests are plentiful, the markets loud with trade. Pilgrims travel from Greece and Judea just to see her temples, her festivals, her face. Even the scholars of Athens speak her name with awe, saying that in Cleopatra's reign, Alexandria has reclaimed its place as the heart of the world. But she does not mistake peace for permanence. Beneath her calm, she feels the faint tremor of destiny approaching, the slow march of Roman ambition across the horizon. Every night she studies the stars as if reading a script written for her alone. Her astronomers speak of omens, of conjunctions between Mars and Venus, of signs foretelling a meeting that will change empires. She listens, saying nothing. In her dreams, she sometimes sees a man's face, half in shadow, half in fire. Not Caesar's. Another's. A soldier with a poet's eyes, laughing amid the wreckage of war. When she wakes, she finds herself standing by the window, the city silver under moonlight, and she wonders whether the gods are sending her visions or warnings. And so Egypt waits, breathing between calm and storm. The queen's power gleams at its height, her image burnished into every coin, her voice carried on every wind. The Nile floods faithfully, as if answering only to her will. But far to the west, Rome churns again, its legions restless, its generals hungry. Soon, Another ship will appear on the horizon. Another man will step ashore, bearing both admiration and ruin. And when he does, Cleopatra will meet him not as Caesar's shadow, nor as a grieving widow, but as something greater, the living spirit of Egypt itself, wrapped in linen and legend, eyes like the river at dusk. The queen has rebuilt her kingdom. Now she will defend it. The stage is set, the gods already watching. And in the hush before the tide turns, Alexandria gleams, bright, fragile, eternal, holding its breath for of its queen's fate. The air in Alexandria changes again, soft at dawn, heavy by noon, thick with the weight of a silence that feels like anticipation. From the palace balcony, Cleopatra watches gulls circle over the harbor. The water glitters, the same serene blue that greeted her when Caesar's ships once anchored there. Yet now, the sight carries an ache. His ghost lingers in every wave, in every echo of the word Rome. The Ides of March had come and gone, but their echo traveled faster than any ship. Whispers of knives in the Senate, of marble steps running red. Whispers of betrayal, of liberty reborn, of chaos let loose. And through those whispers, one truth: Julius Caesar, lover, ally, and architect of empires, was gone. At first, Cleopatra refused to believe it. The messenger had arrived trembling, his clothes torn from the long road. They struck him down, he gasped. In the Senate itself. She'd listened in stillness, her face unreadable. By whom? She'd asked. By all of them, he said. By Rome. After that, she dismissed the court and walked alone to the terrace overlooking the sea. The horizon blurred, the wind warm against her face. She thought of his voice, his wit, his arrogance, his tenderness. She thought of the man who had taught her that power could be shaped by intellect as much as by blood. And she thought, too, of how quickly power changes hands. When she returned to the palace, her eyes were dry. She gathered her advisors, issued orders for mourning, and commanded that Caesar's image be placed beside the gods in every temple of Alexandria. Let the world know, she said, her voice steady, that Egypt remembers what Rome forgets. In the months that followed, the sea between Rome and Egypt seemed to shrink with each new message. Caesar's assassins, Brutus, Cassius, and their Senate allies, claimed they had freed the Republic. But in truth, they had unleashed wolves. Rome had no center now. Its legions were loyal not to laws, but to men, to Caesar's legacy, and to those who dared inherit it. From the storm rose two figures, young and ambitious: Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, cold and calculating as marble, and Mark Antony, his general and friend, fierce, charming, impulsive. One carried Rome's legal claim, the other its heart. Cleopatra knew their names long before they knew hers. She studied every dispatch, every rumor, every portrait sent across the sea. Two heirs to one throne, two paths to chaos. And somewhere between them, the future of her child, and her kingdom. In the halls of the palace, Caesar Ion plays beneath frescoes of gods and conquerors. He is growing taller now, his features sharpening. Sometimes, when he tilts his head, she sees Caesar's expression in miniature, the same curiosity, the same flicker of defiance. At night, she tells him stories of his father, but not the ones Rome would tell. She speaks of a man who built roads where there were none, who believed that order could be carved out of chaos. She leaves out the daggers, the betrayal. There will be time enough for that. For now, she teaches him patience, the art of waiting, of knowing when the Nile floods and when it retreats. Yet waiting has its price. Rome's new masters begin to demand tribute, allegiance, submission. Their envoys arrive at her court with scrolls heavy with wax seals and heavier with threats. They speak of debts owed, of friendship remembered, of loyalty expected. Cleopatra receives them graciously, offering figs and honeyed wine, her eyes calm and unblinking. When they finish their rehearsed speeches, she leans forward slightly. Tell me, she says softly, Does Rome send words because it fears to send men? The envoys stiffen. They will later write that the Queen of Egypt smiles like a blade being unsheathed. But beneath that poise, she feels the tension tightening around her. Egypt is rich, but alone. She cannot fight Rome, not yet, not openly. She must choose her next move carefully, as one chooses a stone in the game of Senate, every placement deliberate, every mistake permanent. It is then that word reaches her. Antony has taken command of the eastern provinces. He has left Rome behind and set his base in Tarsus, near the southern coast of Asia Minor. He sends summons to the client rulers of the east, kings and queens, allies and tributaries. Among those names is hers. The court falls into an uneasy silence when the letter arrives. The scroll bears Antony's seal, its words formal yet familiar. He summons her to answer for her loyalty to Rome and her role during Caesar's wars. But Cleopatra reads between the lines. This is not an accusation. It is an invitation. Antony is no Octavian, no shadow hiding behind law. He is bold, theatrical, reckless in his appetites. She has studied enough men of Rome to recognize the difference. And she knows that the theater of power needs an audience. Preparations begin in secret. The royal ship is rebuilt from the ground up, a floating palace of cedar and gold. Its sails are dyed deep purple, the color of kings. The decks are scattered with rose petals, the oars carved from fragrant wood. When the sun strikes it, the entire vessel gleams as if it sails upon fire. Her advisors plead caution. Antony is dangerous, they warn. He conquers by charm as much as by sword. Cleopatra only smiles. So do I. The day of departure arrives. The sea glitters beneath her ship as if it, too, waits to see what will unfold. She wears a crown of polished gold, her robes woven with threads of silver and blue. Around her, the attendants move like living statues, perfumed and silent. As the ship glides from the harbor, drums beat in slow rhythm. The wind fills the sails, carrying with it the scent of myrrh and salt, the promise of destiny. That night, as Alexandria fades behind her, Cleopatra stands at the prow, gazing at the stars. The constellations burn bright, the same stars that watched her father's fall, her own exile, her rise. They have seen empires bloom and wither, they have seen gods dethroned and reborn. She wonders what they see now, a woman sailing into history or into ruin. She touches the cobra-shaped diadem on her brow, feeling the metal warm beneath her skin. Guide me, she murmurs to Isis, her eternal patron. Not to safety, but to significance. The river widens into sea. The oars cut the dark water in perfect rhythm. The drums slow, then fade, until only the sound of the waves remains. Behind her, the palace lights of Alexandria flicker once more, then vanish. Ahead, the horizon glows faintly with dawn, the same dawn that will rise over Tarsus, where a Roman waits, curious, powerful, and unaware that his fate is already sailing toward him. By the time she sleeps, the ship has become her dream. And in that dream, the sea hums with prophecy. Two empires shall meet not by sword, but by gaze. And when they do, the world shall tilt upon that meeting, as surely as the moon pulls the tide. The sea darkens, then softens again into dawn. The horizon glows like the edge of a blade as Cleopatra's ship drifts into the mouth of the Cydnus River. The air is cool and fragrant, heavy with cinnamon, rose oil, and the faint smoke of torches burning along the shore. In the stillness before daybreak, the Nile-born queen arrives in Tarsus. Rome's banners ripple faintly from the towers above, crimson against the mist. On the quayside, legions stand ready, their armor flashing in the half-light. Beyond them waits Mark Antony. He has heard stories of her, of course. All of Rome has. The woman who tamed Caesar's ambition, who rules Egypt with a scholar's mind and a goddess's poise. But stories are smoke. He expects a trick, not revelation. Then the wind shifts. Music rises, flutes, lyres, soft drums in perfect rhythm with the oars. The queen's barge glides into view, its hull painted gold, its sails the color of sunset. Attendants dressed as sea nymphs scatter petals into the water. Slaves wave fans of peacock feathers that shimmer like living jewels. Upon the deck, beneath a canopy of woven silver, Cleopatra reclines upon a couch of violet silk. She does not look at him. Not yet. The scent of myrrh drifts across the river, thick and intoxicating. The crowd on the bank stirs, soldiers, merchants, courtiers, all falling to silence. When she finally rises, it is like the sea itself has lifted. She descends from the barge with unhurried grace, each movement deliberate. The sun catches her crown, the gold flares bright as flame. Antony watches, transfixed. In that moment, he is not general or consul. He is simply a man, struck still by myth made flesh. When they meet at last, there are no words for a heartbeat. Only the hum of insects in the reeds, the faint clatter of armor. Queen of Egypt, Antony says finally, his voice roughened by the long campaign trails of his life. Rome's lion, she answers, a faint smile curving her lips. I thought I would find you taller. He laughs, a deep, startled sound that breaks the tension like glass shattering. You expected a god? I expected a man who remembered that gods can bleed. The soldiers glance uneasily between them, but Antony, instead of anger, only smiles wider. He gestures toward the city. Come then. Let us dine, and see which of us bleeds first. The feast that night becomes legend. It begins at dusk and ends with the sunrise bleeding into the windows of the palace. Tables groan under the weight of figs, roasted lamb, honeyed wine. The scent of jasmine clings to the air. Laughter echoes through the hall. Cleopatra sits beside Antony, her eyes bright, her movements effortless. She listens more than she speaks, as she always does, yet every word she chooses lands like an arrow. Antony brags, of Gaul, of Parthia, of the Senate's envy. She humors him with a quiet smile. And yet, she says, for all your conquests, here you are, feasting in another queen's house. He grins, unoffended. Perhaps conquest tires even conquerors. Or perhaps, she replies, lifting her goblet, you've forgotten that to rule men is easier than to rule desire. He studies her a long moment, his smile fading into something else, something like recognition. Over the days that follow, Tarsus becomes their theater. They dine, they debate, they test one another like swords clashing under silk. Antony, who has faced the legions of Pompey and the judgment of Caesar, finds himself undone by her calm. She never raises her voice, never flatters, yet every sentence bends the air around her. He tries to charm her. She counters with wit sharper than steel. He attempts intimidation. She meets it with silence that turns his strength to absurdity. At night, he paces the marble corridors, thinking not of Rome but of her voice, her scent, her laughter. By morning, he sends word that he will accompany her to Alexandria, to discuss alliances, he claims. But in truth, he has already chosen his fate. The return voyage is slower this time. The barge drifts on calm waters. The nights are long and heavy with music. Antony joins her beneath the canopy, both reclining on silken cushions as the river slides past in endless rhythm. She speaks of Egypt's gods, of how love and power are not enemies but reflections. He listens, half skeptical, half entranced. In Rome, he says, love makes men weak. In Egypt, she replies, love makes them eternal. He laughs softly. Eternal? Or enslaved? She meets his gaze, steady, fearless. There is no difference if you choose it. When they arrive in Alexandria, the city blooms in celebration. Bells ring, incense fills the streets. Crowds gather at the harbor, tossing flowers into the waves as the barge glides to shore. It is said that Antony's face changes when he sees the city for the first time, the vast white temples, the Pharos blazing like a star, the streets alive with song and color. Rome's marble feels cold by comparison. In Egypt, he finds not conquest but enchantment. And Cleopatra, ever the strategist, gives him no time to recover. She takes him through her world, the library, where knowledge sleeps in the scent of papyrus and dust, the observatory, where priests trace the heavens, the temples, where her likeness stands beside Isis and Hathor. Everywhere he looks, he sees her, not merely as queen, but as embodiment of a civilization older than his gods. Rome conquers by might, Egypt conquers by memory. Soon Antony forgets he ever came as emissary. He stays weeks, then months. He wears Egyptian linen instead of Roman armor, feasts with scholars instead of senators. He begins to laugh again, to breathe again. They hunt together in the delta marshes, their chariots racing through reeds. They sail upriver to Thebes, where priests greet them as Osiris and Isis reborn. They dine beneath ceilings painted with stars, surrounded by dancers whose movements echo the ancient stories of creation. Each day becomes ritual. Each glance, a negotiation between power and passion. And the world beyond their borders begins to murmur. Rome whispers that Antony has fallen under a foreign spell. Egypt whispers that its queen has found her equal. Both are right. In the hush of their private chambers, the masks fall away. The laughter grows softer, the words more dangerous. She asks about Rome's wars. He asks about her childhood. He tells her of battles fought in snow, of friends lost to ambition. She tells him of her first years as queen, of famine, of fear, of learning how to survive in a court of knives. He reaches for her hand. "You were born for thrones," he says. She looks at him, eyes glinting. "I was born for endurance. Thrones are the reward of those who survive." He leans close. "Then perhaps we will survive together." Their love is not gentle. It is fire and storm, strategy and surrender. They are both too powerful to worship, too proud to yield. Yet somehow, they do, each to the other, in equal measure. When they laugh, the palace trembles. When they argue, even the servants retreat in silence. But when they touch, the world outside dissolves. And so the myth begins, not of Rome or Egypt, but of two souls who dared to dream an empire built not on conquest, but on union. Together they imagine what the world might become. "Why must Rome rule the East?" she asks one night as the lanterns flicker low. "Why not share it?" He considers this, tracing the rim of his cup. "You speak of peace. I speak of balance," she says. "Two halves of the same world, Rome and Egypt, West and East. Not rivals, but partners." He smiles faintly. "And who rules this balanced world, my queen?" She answers without hesitation. "We do." In time, Antony begins to act as though it were already true. He divides Rome's eastern provinces, granting kingdoms to her allies. He sends gifts, lands, ships, titles, to Caesar Ion, naming him King of Kings. And for each decree, Cleopatra rewards him not with words but with loyalty, devotion, and that singular magic that makes every ambition seem possible. To her, this union is more than passion. It is strategy made divine. Together, they can reshape the map of the known world. To him, she is both salvation and damnation, the one person who makes him feel alive while leading him toward ruin. And perhaps, deep down, he senses it. But he does not turn back. The nights in Alexandria become endless. Banquets spill into dawn. The air smells of wine and roses. The laughter of lovers and philosophers mixes with the music of flutes. In the city streets, the people celebrate them as gods return to earth. And somewhere in Rome, Octavian sharpens his patience like a blade, watching, waiting. For now, though, the world still belongs to them. The queen and her general. The goddess and her warrior. The union of passion and empire. The heat in Alexandria has changed. It no longer feels like the warmth of summer. but like the breath before a fever, something thick, uneasy, expectant. The streets are still full of music, of golden laughter, but beneath the surface, the air hums with something sharper. Whispers. Rome is whispering again. In the marble halls of the Senate, far across the sea, men in togas murmur beneath frescoes of gods long tired of human vanity. They speak of Antony not as a general but as a ghost, absent, enchanted, lost to the east. They speak of Cleopatra not as queen but as sorceress, she who has wrapped a Roman consul in silk and shadow. And at the center of it all sits Octavian, calm, patient, listening. He says little. He does not need to. The silence around his name grows heavier with each passing month, and when he finally speaks, it is with the voice of destiny. He declares that Antony has betrayed the Republic, that he has forgotten his duty to Rome, that he kneels now before a foreign woman who dares call herself goddess. The senators murmur, some in disbelief, some in delight. Octavian knows their weakness. He feeds it carefully. He paints a picture, Antony in Egyptian silk, drunk on gold and perfume, giving away Roman lands to his lover's child, naming Caesar Ion, King of Kings, as if the blood of Julius Caesar were his alone to share. Rome, he says, has been conquered not by armies, but by a queen's bed. And the people, hungry for outrage, believe him. The message spreads like plague through the streets of Rome, through its markets and taverns, through the legions themselves. By the time Antony learns of it, the fire is already burning. He and Cleopatra are sailing on the Nile, their barge moving lazily between lotus-dotted banks. The night is soft, scented with jasmine, the water reflecting the glow of countless torches. He sits beside her, relaxed, a cup of wine in hand, his laughter echoing across the water. But then a courier arrives, dusty from the long road from Syria. He kneels, presenting a scroll. Antony reads. His expression hardens, the laughter dies in his throat. He hands the scroll to Cleopatra without a word. She scans it quickly, her eyes narrowing. He accuses you of treason. He exhales slowly. He accuses me of weakness. Which to Rome, she says softly, is the same thing. They are silent for a moment. The river moves beneath them, indifferent, ancient. Then Cleopatra folds the scroll and sets it aside. You can answer him. Go to Rome. Speak before the Senate. They loved you once. They will love you again. He shakes his head. Octavian has already filled their ears. My words would only echo his lies. She studies him, her gaze level. Then we fight him. Antony looks out over the Nile, the moonlight glinting off the water like unsheathed blades. Fight Rome? She tilts her chin. No. Fight him. They begin to prepare. The harbors of Alexandria fill with the hammering of shipwrights, the clang of bronze and iron. Sails are dyed crimson and black. Gold is melted into coin to pay soldiers. Antony summons his legions from Syria and Greece. Cleopatra contributes Egypt's fleet, its captains hardened by years of war on the river. The two forces merge into one, a sea-bound empire glittering with ambition. The generals kneel before the queen, awaiting her orders. She rises from her throne, the light catching on her gold bracelets, her voice calm and absolute. Rome believes we will kneel, she says. Let them remember that the Nile flows toward no master. Her words ripple through the hall like a spell. The soldiers beat their spears against their shields in thunderous rhythm. Antony watches her, pride and unease mingling in his chest. He has fought 100 battles, but never beside a queen who commands not by fear, but by faith. And though he loves her, he feels the world tilting. The alliance of Antony and Cleopatra becomes the talk of every empire. Their armies train along the Mediterranean coast, their fleets gather in formation. In the streets of Alexandria, poets sing of the coming victory, of how East and West will unite under one banner, one love, one dream. But in Rome, Octavian sings another song. He stands before the Senate and declares that Antony has betrayed his homeland for lust, that he means to move the capital of the world to Alexandria, that he has crowned Cleopatra, Queen of Kings, and himself her consort. He holds up Antony's will, stolen from the temple of the Vestal Virgins, and reads it aloud. The Senate gasps. The crowd roars. Antony's estates, they learn, are left not to Rome, but to Cleopatra's children. His body, he wishes to be buried not in Roman soil, but in Egypt, beside her. To the people of Rome, that single line is enough. In their eyes, Antony is already dead. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra walks the palace gardens as dusk falls, the scent of date flowers heavy in the air. Antony joins her, his armor freshly polished, his face lined with sleeplessness. "You know what they're saying in Rome," he tells her. "I know what they've always said. They'll call you witch, harlot, temptress." She cuts him off with a small smile. "And you'll call me queen." He laughs quietly, the sound rough, weary. "Do you ever fear them?" "I fear the Nile when it dries," she says. "I fear silence when my people no longer sing." "But men with daggers and titles?" "No." She turns to face him. "You, Antony, you are the one they fear. Not me. Rome cannot bear the idea of a man who loves what it cannot control." He looks at her then, not as ally or lover, but as mirror. And he knows she is right. By spring, the fleets are ready. 500 ships, their prows gilded and carved with the heads of lions, hawks, serpents. Sails gleam crimson in the sunlight. The harbors of Alexandria thunder with the sound of drums and horns. Cleopatra watches from the balcony as the first ships depart. Caesarion stands beside her, his eyes wide with awe. "Will you win?" he asks. She smooths his hair, smiling faintly. "We will try. But Rome always wins," he says. "Then it is time Rome learned how to lose." Her words are quiet, but the wind seems to carry them farther than sound should travel, out over the water, across the sea, toward the waiting legions of Octavian. Antony sails ahead, commanding from the flagship. Cleopatra follows, her own vessel bright with gold and turquoise, her banner of the twin cobras snapping in the wind. The sun burns overhead, and the sea stretches endless and gleaming between them and destiny. They do not yet know where the final battle will find them, only that it is coming. For now, there is still the hum of the wind, the creak of oars, the smell of salt and oil. At night, Antony stands alone on deck, watching the constellations wheel above him. He thinks of Rome's marble, of its noise, its hunger. Then he thinks of her, her laughter, her brilliance, her impossible calm. He realizes that even if he loses the world, he has already chosen his empire. Behind him, in her cabin, Cleopatra writes by lamplight. Her quill glides across the papyrus, shaping words that will outlast empires. To her son, to the gods, to history itself, she writes. "If we fall, it will not be as slaves, but as sovereigns." The Nile remembers. And so must the world. She seals the letter with her crest, a serpent coiled around the sun, and places it in a small ivory chest beside her bed. Outside, the drums beat on, deep and rhythmic as a heartbeat. The tide pulls eastward, toward Actium, toward destiny. Whispers of history. The wind off the Ionian Sea carries the smell of smoke and salt, sharp, metallic, foreboding. The morning light glints off thousands of oar blades rising and falling in perfect rhythm, turning the water into a field of molten bronze. Far to the west, beyond the hazy horizon, Rome breathes in expectation. Far to the east, Egypt holds its breath. Between them, upon these restless waters, two lovers prepare to decide the fate of the world. It is September, in the 31st year before Christ. The place, Actium. The sea is calm, deceptively so. Gulls drift above the fleets gathering for war, their cries thin and cold, as if warning the living to remember the dead. Cleopatra's flagship gleams in the dawn, its prow plated with gold, its purple sails heavy with the scent of oil and myrrh. Around her, the Egyptian fleet spreads like a fan, 200 ships, painted and fortified, their decks lined with archers. To the north, Antony's legions wait aboard massive quinquiremes, their oars dipped in silence. Across the bay, Octavian's navy sits in perfect formation, smaller but faster, disciplined like the man who commands them. His general, Agrippa, has chosen the ground with the patience of a serpent. He knows the wind, the currents, the pride of his enemies. The gods are watching, and they are silent. At dawn, Cleopatra walks the deck of her ship, the linen of her robe rippling in the sea breeze. Her eyes trace the horizon, sharp, steady, unreadable. The crew bows as she passes. They are loyal, these sailors of the Nile, but even they sense the strangeness of this battle. They were born to the river, not to open sea. Their ships are larger, heavier, built for ceremony and endurance, not the quick, darting strikes of Rome's wolfish galleys. Yet they will follow her, as they always have. Antony stands at the rail of his flagship nearby, bronze armor gleaming, jaws set. When he sees her watching, he lifts his hand in salute. For a brief moment, the man returns, the soldier who once led legions across the Alps, who fought beside Caesar himself. She answers his gesture with a small nod, regal but warm. Their eyes meet across the waves. The wind stirs her hair. He smiles faintly. For one heartbeat, they are not generals or rulers, but simply man and woman, bound by something greater than empire. Then the horns sound. The sea erupts into motion. From Octavian's line, hundreds of sleek Liburnian ships surge forward, cutting through the water like knives. Their rowers move in perfect rhythm, their rams gleaming with fresh bronze. Trumpets blare. The air fills with the screams of gulls and men alike. Antony raises his sword. His voice bellows across the decks, carried by wind and courage. "For Rome!" he cries, and his men roar the answer. "For Antony!" Cleopatra's ships answer with their own chant. "For Egypt!" "For the Queen!" The two cries reeve together across the sea, an echo of love and defiance. The first impact comes like thunder. A Roman galley slams into an Egyptian warship, splintering its hull. Arrows hiss through the air, catapults launch flaming pitch. Smoke billows upward black and oily. The wind catches it and drives it straight into Antony's fleet. The sun disappears behind the haze. The sea becomes a mirror of chaos, fire reflected in water, water feeding flame. Antony's heavier ships try to ram, but the smaller Roman vessels dart aside, circling like sharks. Agrippa's plan unfolds perfectly. He avoids direct engagement, drawing the Egyptians farther into the open sea, away from the coast, away from safety. Antony realizes too late what is happening. He orders his captains to reform, to hold the line. But the smoke blinds them, the current pulls them apart. On Cleopatra's flagship, the queen grips the railing, her knuckles white. She has seen war before, on land, on the river, but never this madness of fire and wind and steel. The cries of dying men mix with the crash of waves and the roar of burning wood. Her eyes search for Antony's banner amid the chaos. When she finds it, his golden eagle still flying, his ship surrounded yet unbroken, something within her hardens. The battle grinds on for hours. The heat is unbearable. Men fight knee-deep in water, slipping on blood-slick decks. Oars break, sails burn, ships list and sink. The sea begins to fill with floating corpses, their armor glinting faintly beneath the waves. Cleopatra's commanders beg her to withdraw, to save the fleet before it is lost. She hesitates, her heart torn between love and duty. To stay is to risk Egypt's annihilation. To leave is to abandon Antony. She looks again to the horizon. The wind shifts, sudden and sharp, blowing the smoke eastward. Through the haze, she can see the open sea, a path, narrow but clear. For a long moment, she says nothing. Then she turns to her helmsman. Prepare the sails. He stares at her, stunned. Your Majesty. Do it, she commands. Her voice is steady, but her hands tremble. The drums sound again, lower, slower. The oars dip. Her ship begins to move. Across the water, Antony sees it. He recognizes her sails instantly, the purple silk that has followed him across 2 continents. At first, he does not believe what he sees. Then the truth strikes him like a blade. Cleopatra is leaving. Some say she fled in fear, others that it was planned, a desperate bid to save what remained of Egypt. No one will ever know. What is known is this: the sight of her ship unfurling its sails broke something inside Antony that no enemy could touch. He stands frozen for a moment amid the chaos, watching as her fleet turns eastward, slipping through the gap in the Roman lines. Then, as if possessed, he leaps into a small galley and shouts to his men, "Follow the Queen!" They protest, but he does not listen. The oars dip, the galley surges forward, cutting through smoke and flame, chasing the fading gleam of her sails. Behind him, his great armada crumbles. Commanders call for orders that never come. The line collapses. Rome closes in. The Battle of Actium is lost. When Antony finally reaches her ship, hours later, the sea around them is silent again. The smoke has thinned. The horizon glows with the pale blue of late afternoon. He boards the deck without a word. The sailors part, their faces downcast. Cleopatra stands waiting. The sunlight glints on her crown. Her expression is unreadable. For a moment neither speaks. Then Antony says, low and hoarse, "You ran." She meets his eyes, steady but hollow. "I saved what could be saved." He laughs once, bitterly broken. "You saved me." "I saved Egypt," she says, though even as she speaks, she knows the light tastes of salt and ash. They stand together at the rail, watching the last of their ships vanish behind them, sinking into the reddening sea. The wind is soft now, almost tender, as if mocking them. "Was it worth it?" he asks quietly. She does not answer. She only closes her eyes, feeling the weight of the crown upon her head, the weight of 1,000 years pressing down through her blood. That night, their ships anchor near the coast of Greece. The fires of the battle still glow faintly on the horizon, reflections trembling across the water. In her cabin, Cleopatra sits beside a small lamp. Antony lies nearby, silent, staring at the ceiling. Between them hangs a silence heavier than any storm. At last she says, "This is not the end." He turns his head toward her, his eyes empty of belief. "It is only another beginning," she insists. "We will rebuild. In Egypt." He says nothing. Outside, the wind rises, whispering through the rigging like a sigh from the gods. History will call it defeat. But to those who saw it, the sailors, the soldiers, the slaves who rowed until their hands bled, it was more than that. It was the death of an age. The last moment when the world might have been something else, when East and West could have been one, when love might have rivaled empire. The sea keeps its secrets. The ashes sink, the waves close over them. By dawn, only the gulls remain, circling above the water where 2 empires drowned together, leaving behind only echoes and salt and the faint scent of myrrh on the wind. The sea that once carried their glory has grown cold. Autumn sweeps across the Mediterranean like a shroud of dull gold, and the winds that once filled Cleopatra's sails now whisper only of loss. The wreckage of Actium drifts somewhere behind them. Broken oars, shattered hulls, the ghosts of men whose loyalty sank beneath the waves. Cleopatra's ships limp home to Alexandria, their sails torn, their decks scorched. The city that greets them is quiet, unsure whether to rejoice at the Queen's return or mourn what her return means. From the balcony of her palace, Cleopatra looks out across the harbor. The lighthouse still burns, steady and defiant, but the light feels colder now. The sea is hers again, yes, but at what cost? The horizon no longer promises possibility. It threatens judgment. Behind her, Antony stands in shadow. He is not the same man who once strode through these halls laughing, radiant with victory and wine. His face is gaunt, his armor tarnished. The eyes that once saw conquest now see ghosts. The defeat at Actium has marked him like a scar that will not heal. The generals who survived bring little comfort. Their words are careful, their loyalty brittle. Many have already defected to Octavian, hoping for pardon. Antony knows it. Cleopatra knows it. The silence between them grows heavier with each passing day. And yet, in the privacy of night, they still find each other. Sometimes she lies beside him and listens to the uneven rhythm of his breathing. He speaks little, except in dreams, half-formed mutterings of legions, of Rome, of a boy named Octavian who has turned the world against him. When he wakes, there is a moment, just a heartbeat, when he looks at her not as the cause of his ruin, but as the only thing left that feels alive. In that fragile space between guilt and tenderness, they cling to each other. But daylight always comes, and daylight demands decisions. Cleopatra returns to her duties with a precision that hides her fear. She reopens the treasury, dispatches envoys to distant allies, calls for the restoration of Egypt's defenses. She moves through the palace like a figure carved from alabaster, graceful, unyielding, impossible to read. Her servants whisper that she sleeps little, eats less. In public she wears her crown. In private she measures the empire she has left. Each letter from Rome brings darker news. Octavian's legions march south. City after city yields to him. His envoys promise mercy to those who abandon Antony and the queen. Mercy, in the language of Rome, means survival without dignity. Cleopatra tears the letters apart unread. Antony, too, tries to rally himself. He drills what remains of his soldiers, reviews the fleet, promises that Rome will tire before it reaches them. But his men see through him. They see the exhaustion in his posture, the dull fire in his eyes. They follow him still, not from faith, but from habit. One evening, after reviewing the troops, Antony returns to the palace and finds Cleopatra in the temple of Isis. She kneels before the statue, her head bowed, her lips moving in silent prayer. He watches from the doorway, unsure whether he is intruding on faith or confession. When she finally turns, her face is serene. "Do you pray for victory?" he asks. "No," she says softly. "For understanding." He frowns. "Of what?" "Of why the gods give us everything we ask for," she says, "only to take it when we begin to love it." He does not answer. He cannot. Weeks pass. The sands grow colder, the Nile lower. The air itself seems to hold its breath. Then the news comes that Octavian's fleet has entered Egyptian waters. His legions are days away. The final curtain begins to fall. Antony rides out to meet them near Pelusium, hoping to make one last stand. Cleopatra stays behind in Alexandria, gathering what remains of her power. The night before he leaves, they dine together alone. No music, no servants, no ceremony. Only wine, flickering lamplight, and the hum of cicadas outside the window. Cleopatra raises her cup. "To what remains," she says. He smiles faintly. "To what never was." They drink, and for a moment, the world is quiet. The battle that follows is brief. Antony's troops, outnumbered and weary, scatter at the first assault. His commanders defect mid-fight. When the dust settles, what remains of his army lies broken on the sands, the banners trampled beneath Roman boots. He rides back toward Alexandria alone. The sun burns low and red behind him, staining the dunes the color of blood. By the time he reaches the city gates, he is half delirious from exhaustion and shame. It is then that he hears the rumor, the one that will undo him. Cleopatra is dead. The words fall from the lips of a fleeing soldier, uncertain, unverified. but Antony believes them instantly. Perhaps part of him has been waiting for it, needing the tragedy to complete the story. He stumbles back to the palace, sword in hand, and finds an empty chamber. The light pours in through the lattice, golden and indifferent. He whispers her name once, then again. When no answer comes, he presses the blade to his chest and drives it home. The wound is deep but not mortal. His servants rush in, horrified. They lift him, bleeding, gasping, and carry him through the corridors that once rang with laughter and song. Somewhere ahead, a messenger runs to fetch the queen. For Cleopatra is not dead. She waits in the mausoleum she had ordered built weeks earlier, a refuge of marble and gold, meant to hold her treasures should the city fall. When the door bursts open and she sees Antony in their arms, blood soaking his armor, her composure fractures for the first time in years. She rushes to him, her hands trembling. "Why?" she cries. "Why would you do this?" He smiles weakly. "They said you were gone. And you believed them?" "I would rather follow you into death," he whispers, "than live without you." The light in the chamber flickers. She kneels beside him, cradling his head in her lap. His blood stains her gown, her arms, her face. "Don't leave me," she murmurs, her voice breaking. He tries to speak, but only manages her name, once softly, as if it were prayer. Then the strength drains from him. His head falls back against her shoulder. Outside, the Roman horns sound in the distance. The city is falling. Cleopatra closes her eyes and whispers, "Then let it fall." They bury him that night in silence. No priests, no songs. Only her and a handful of loyal servants. She lays his sword across his chest and kisses his brow. When it is done, she walks through the palace one last time, touching the walls, the tapestries, the empty thrones. Everything she has built is slipping away, turning to dust beneath the boots of another empire. Octavian is approaching the gates. She knows what he wants, not Egypt, but her surrender. Her image, her humiliation. A queen turned captive, paraded through Rome's streets like a trophy. She will not allow it. At dawn, she calls for her attendants, Charmian and Ires, her oldest companions. They look at her and understand without words. Together they begin to prepare. She bathes in milk and rosewater. Her hair is braided, her skin anointed with oil. She dresses in linen white as dawn, a circlet of gold resting upon her brow. Her last act as queen is not to command, but to choose. When Octavian's soldiers arrive at the gates, they find her already locked within the mausoleum, surrounded by the treasures of Egypt, gold statues, scrolls, perfumes, and jewels that once lit the world. The conqueror waits outside. She does not open the door. Inside, the air smells of incense and memory. She stands beside the sarcophagus meant for her and looks to her servants. "Is it ready?" she asks. Charmian nods, her eyes glistening. A small basket lies at her feet, covered with woven rushes. Inside, the faint rustle of movement, a hiss, soft and ancient. Cleopatra kneels. She touches the basket gently, then lifts the lid. Her voice is calm when she speaks. "So ends the reign of those who loved too greatly." She reaches in. A moment's silence. Then a shudder, a breath, a whisper of pain and peace. When the soldiers finally break open the doors, they find her seated on her golden couch, her head bowed as if in sleep. The serpent lies coiled at her feet, its work complete. Charmian, dying beside her, adjusts the queen's crown. "Was this well done?" a Roman guard asks her. She smiles faintly, her voice barely a breath. "It was fitting for one born of kings." Then she, too, is still. Outside, the morning breaks over Alexandria, painting the sea in gold. The lighthouse still burns, unwavering. The world has changed again. Rome will claim victory. Octavian will become Augustus, the first emperor. But history will remember something different, that for a moment, a queen and her general dared to stand against eternity. Their bodies are dust now, their empires gone. Yet their names, whispered together, still echo on the wind. Cleopatra and Antony. Love and ruin. Queen and general. Fire and sea. And beneath the eternal sun of Egypt, the Nile keeps flowing, slow, silent, forgiving, carrying their story forever toward the horizon. The light in Alexandria is strange that morning, soft and heavy, as though the sun itself hesitates to rise. The sea outside the palace walls lies flat and pale, its surface broken only by the slow rhythm of the waves. The city is quiet, holding its breath, waiting for what it does not yet know has already come to pass. Within the mausoleum, the scent of incense lingers in the air, mingling with the sweetness of lotus and the faint iron tang of bronze. The chamber glows with muted gold, the flicker of oil lamps painting shadows that seem to move of their own accord. On her couch of beaten gold, Cleopatra lies still. Her face is calm, her lips faintly curved, as though she has just heard a secret the rest of the world will never know. Outside, the soldiers whisper among themselves, uncertain whether to enter. They had been ordered by Octavian to take her alive, to parade her through the streets of Rome, bound in chains of silver, a living trophy of his triumph. But the queen has denied him his spectacle. She has chosen her own ending, as she chose her life, deliberately, elegantly, on her own terms. Octavian himself arrives not long after, his expression carved from marble. He steps into the chamber and stops. The air is thick with perfume, the silence absolute. For the first time, the man who would be emperor finds himself before something greater than conquest, before a woman who has conquered even death. He looks at her for a long moment, saying nothing. The serpent lies coiled at her feet, its scales glinting faintly in the lamplight. Her attendants, Charmian and Iris, rest beside her, their faces peaceful, their final duty complete. She has cheated me, he murmurs, not in anger but in wonder. Even now, she rules the moment. And he is right. Cleopatra's death spreads through the palace like a sigh, carried on the tongues of servants, soldiers, courtiers. By nightfall, it reaches the city gates. By dawn, it is known across the empire. The Queen of the Nile is dead. But in Alexandria, no one truly believes it. The people fill the temples, laying garlands of lotus and papyrus, whispering prayers to Isis, to the goddess who never abandons her own. Some swear they see her face in the clouds above the harbor. Others claim the Nile itself rises higher that night, as though to bear her spirit to the gods. In the marketplaces, old women murmur, "She is not gone. She has become divine." And perhaps she has. In the days that follow, Octavian secures the city. He orders Cleopatra's treasures catalogued, her statues veiled, her name erased from official decrees. Egypt becomes a province of Rome. The eagle of the empire rises where once the double crown of the pharaohs stood. But even he cannot bring himself to destroy her entirely. When her body is prepared for burial, he decrees that she and Antony be laid side by side, their tombs joined. They would have it so, he says, though his tone carries a trace of something almost like reverence. And so they are united again, two flames extinguished, yet still glowing in the dark of history. It is said that when the priests closed the tomb, the sea grew restless, as if aware that an age had ended. The last queen of Egypt was gone, and with her, the last echo of a world where gods walked among mortals, where love and power were one. The empire of Alexander, of Ptolemy, of the pharaohs themselves, ended not with war, but with a whisper, with a bite. Yet, in that act, Cleopatra transformed herself from queen into myth. What did she think, in those final moments? Perhaps she sat alone in that golden room, the sound of the city fading behind the walls. Perhaps she felt the faint tremor of the earth, the distant thunder of the Roman army outside. Perhaps she looked around at her treasures, scrolls and jewels, relics of ancestors long turned to dust, and realized that all of it was smaller than a single heartbeat. Perhaps she thought of Antony, of the night they met on the river, of the laughter, the battles, the promises, of the strange tenderness that had survived even ruin. Perhaps she thought of Caesarion, her son, the child of two worlds, now fled toward the desert, his fate uncertain. She would know in her bones that Rome would never let him live. Yet she would hope, as mothers do, that the gods might intervene. And perhaps, at last, she would turn her thoughts to herself, not as queen, not as goddess, but as woman. She had lived as the daughter of dynasties and the mother of an empire's end. She had outwitted generals, seduced conquerors, rebuilt kingdoms, and written her name into eternity. Now, she would write her own epitaph, not in stone, but in silence. The basket lies beside her, the rushes shifting slightly. She watches the movement, calm as one watching the tide. The serpent emerges, pale and sinuous, its scales shining like river water in moonlight. She does not flinch. She only breathes once, slowly, then reaches out her hand. The creature hesitates, tasting the air. Its tongue flicks against her wrist, soft as a sigh. She feels the prickle of fangs, the burn of venom, the warmth that follows. For a heartbeat pain, a sharp spark in the blood. Then peace. Her breath slows. The edges of the world blur. The lamps around her seem to flicker and dim, their flames bending toward her as if in mourning. Her pulse fades, but her gaze remains steady, fixed on something no living eye can see. To the Romans, her death is victory. To Egypt, it is ascension. Poets will write of her for centuries. Some in envy, some in awe, some in hatred they will mistake for fascination. They will call her temptress, witch, goddess, queen. They will argue about her beauty, her cunning, her cruelty, her brilliance. But all will agree on one thing: her name will not fade. The sands will cover her palaces. The river will change its course. Empires will rise and fall, languages will be born and die, but Cleopatra will remain. Her story will survive in marble and ink, in myth and song, in every woman who dares to be more than what the world expects. The serpent's bite was not her end, it was her beginning. Outside, night settles over Alexandria. The lighthouse flame burns steady, its reflection trembling across the dark sea. The wind moves through the palms, carrying the scent of salt and flowers. Somewhere, a priest begins to sing, a hymn older than empires, soft as the river's breath. And within her tomb, beneath the cool marble and eternal silence, Cleopatra lies beside Antony. The queen and the general. The lovers who defied the world. Their hands, it is said, rest close enough to touch. Perhaps they do. And as the centuries drift by, as Rome itself turns to dust, as new kingdoms rise on the bones of the old, their story continues to echo through time. Two hearts bound together by love, ambition, and the quiet defiance of those who refuse to be forgotten. The Nile flows on, indifferent yet eternal, carrying secrets and silt, carrying memory. And somewhere within its whisper, if one listens long enough, one might still hear her voice, calm, soft, certain. I am still here. The centuries begin to move like the slow turning of a wheel. Dust settles over the marble steps of Alexandria, over the ruins of the palace where the queen once walked, over the library's vanished shelves. The city shifts, rebuilds, forgets, remembers, again and again, as all cities do. Yet somewhere beneath the surface, under layers of time and stone, the faint perfume of lotus still lingers, and the air still carries whispers of her name. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, the daughter of the sun. The woman who dared to stand before Rome and call herself equal. Her tomb has long been lost, swallowed by the earth or the sea, but her story refuses burial. It breathes wherever the Nile bends, wherever the moonlight touches water, wherever power and desire cross paths. History writes her in many guises. To the Romans who survived her, she was the foreign temptress who seduced their heroes and brought them low. To the poets who came after, she was beauty incarnate, her death a performance too perfect to believe. To the scholars of later centuries, she was intellect and enigma, the ruler who spoke 9 languages, who kept her empire alive in the jaws of conquest. To her people, she was never gone. In the temples of Upper Egypt, her face was carved beside Isis. In the villages along the riverbanks, mothers told their daughters that the queen still walked the night wind, watching over the Nile, guarding the land that had given her its light. And so she became more than woman, she became symbol. When new conquerors came, she became their cautionary tale. When poets dreamed of love that defied kingdoms, she became their muse. When historians sought to understand how brilliance could coexist with ruin, they turned again to her name. Even now, her image endures, the profile on coins, the kohl-lined eyes that gaze from papyrus fragments, the golden diadem buried somewhere in sand. But these are not what make her eternal. It is not marble or metal that keeps her alive. It is the idea that one soul could contain both the mind of a scholar and the heart of a goddess. That one woman could look upon the greatest empire in the world and see not master, but rival. That even in defeat, there could be dignity. Sometimes, the story resurfaces in dreams. You might wake in the small hours and imagine yourself standing at the edge of the sea, the water black and still. The air smells faintly of myrrh. A figure moves through the mist, her silhouette shimmering with the faint light of dawn. She does not speak, but you know her by the calm in her eyes, the kind of calm that comes only to those who have seen the end of everything and yet remain unafraid. She walks past you, her feet leaving no trace in the sand. The hem of her robe brushes the water, and where it touches, the surface glows. You turn to watch, and she vanishes into the light. But her voice remains soft as the wind, saying, "Empires fall. Stories remain." In Rome, where her enemies were buried in grand mausoleums, time erodes the names on stone. The temples crumble, the gods change, and the empire that once swallowed the world becomes memory. But her name never fades. It is written in every language, painted on every stage, whispered in every love that turns to tragedy. Painters imagine her reclining in gold. Poets imagine her laughter. Scholars argue over the color of her eyes. Each century reinvents her, reshaping her from myth to mirror. To some, she is the embodiment of ambition, to others, of desire, to others still, of freedom itself. In truth, she is all of these, and none. She is what we seek when we look backward through time, meaning, mystery, a glimpse of the divine in the human. Her city, too, refuses to die. Alexandria endures, rebuilt and renamed, yet always the same at its core, a meeting of worlds. Its harbor still smells of salt and spice, its streets still hum with the blend of tongues and dreams. Scholars walk its libraries again, reading by lamplight, tracing the same questions she once asked. And every summer, when the desert wind carries heat like the breath of gods, the city feels close to her again, as though her barge might glide once more into the bay, purple sails gleaming against the sun. What remains of her bloodline vanished long ago. Caesarion, the son of two worlds, met the fate she had foreseen, hunted by Rome, silenced before his manhood. Yet even he is not forgotten. His name is carved beside hers in faded hieroglyphs, the child who bridged empires, if only for a moment. Theirs was a family woven of contradictions, love and strategy, mortality and myth. And perhaps that is why their story endures. Because it speaks not only of power, but of the fragile pulse beneath it, the human need to be seen, remembered, understood. In the quiet of her tomb, wherever it lies, Cleopatra is still queen. The marble may be cracked, the jewels tarnished, but the spirit within remains untouchable. You can almost imagine her there now, resting beside Antony, her hands still near his, her crown resting lightly against her brow. The snake at her feet coils into eternity. Above her, the Nile flows on, the same river that once mirrored her face. It runs through the centuries unchanged, carrying with it the dust of kings and the reflections of those who dreamed themselves immortal. And perhaps that is the secret of her eternity. That she did not seek immortality through conquest, but through presence. Every gesture she made, every word she spoke, carried the awareness of history's gaze. She lived as if already legend, and in doing so, became one. Even her death was not surrender, but transformation, turning flesh into myth, moment into symbol. She chose her ending so that no one else could write it for her. That is why she endures. If you walk beside the Nile today, you may hear her in the water's murmur, the faint rhythm of oars, the echo of music on the wind. If you stand in the ruins of Alexandria at dusk, the light turning honey over the sea, you might feel the air change, as if the world itself remembers her footsteps. She is not a ghost, not quite. She is the echo of ambition, of intellect, of beauty that refuses simplification. She is the moment between dusk and night, when the last light lingers, either living nor gone. And so her story never ends, it only drifts, soft and endless, through time's great river. Cleopatra. The scholar who ruled like a god. The queen who loved as though the world could be remade by touch alone. The woman who chose her death as carefully as her crown. She lives now in memory, in ink and imagination, in every whisper that carries her name across millennia. And as the stars rise again over Egypt, silver on black water, it is easy to believe that somewhere, beneath the weight of centuries, her eyes still open, calm and watchful, tracing the path of the river as it slides toward the sea. Still queen. Still eternal. Still herself. And so, as the night settles, may these echoes of her life, her laughter, her courage, her silence, guide you gently into dreams. Dreams where the Nile gleams beneath moonlight, where gold and shadow dance, and where a single voice, soft and certain, still whispers through the ages. I am Cleopatra, and I have never left.